When you think of D-Day, I imagine you, like me, picture thousands of preposterously courageous soldiers storming the beaches of France's Normandy amid a hail of Nazi machine gun and artillery fire. You picture paratroopers bravely and brazenly dropping from the sky, also encountering enemy fire as they float, so incredibly exposed, down onto European soil, hoping their hearts will still be beating when they land. Overall, you picture a bunch of young men sacrificing literally everything to stop Hitler's aggression and the Axis powers. What you probably don't typically think about are the boats that took the overwhelming majority of soldiers to those beaches. Boats that made D-Day possible. Or at least those boats aren't the first thing that come to mind. Perhaps the imagery just isn't as sexy. And yet, many World War II historians, politicians, and soldiers don't believe that a D-Day victory would have been possible without the naval ingenuity of one man and his remarkable mind. Andrew Higgins. If his name sounds familiar, well, you're probably a bigger World War II historian than I am, or most of the people who listen to Timesuck are. I'd heard of his boats before this week's research, but only because of previous research for this show and a trip to the World War II Museum in New Orleans. I certainly was not familiar with the man behind the name of the Higgins boat. Higgins was a boat manufacturer and one hell of a colorful character based in New Orleans, Louisiana. Prior to working for the U.S. military, he had owned a successful wood import business, Higgins Lumber and Export Co., a business that required a lot of boats to be profitable. He'd acquired a fleet of sailing ships said to have been the largest in America at one time, and to service his massive fleet, he'd established a shipyard. And to improve his fleets, he'd figured out how to design and manufacture his own boats. Boats that turned out to be a lot better than the ones he was previously buying. Higgins loved boats. He had been obsessed with designing them since he was literally in grade school. He was also brilliant, inventive, and ambitious, and after making a lot of money importing a whole lot of hardwood, he wanted to do something different, something more important. He wanted to work with the U.S. military. Through a combination of stubborn persistence and having incredible designs for boats that were just flat out better than anyone else's, Higgins persuaded the U.S. Navy and the Marine Corps to purchase his boats, lots and lots of his boats. And his superior products, innovation, willingness to quickly work through any problem, and sheer determination to succeed, a true failure is not an option mentality, just made his life so noteworthy. He was able to make the best amphibious assault boats in the world, boats that could and did turn amphibious missions like Operation Overlord's D-Day into a massive success. President Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied military forces, the man who gave the green light for D-Day, after leading planning on it, called Higgins the man who won the war for us. And that was not hyperbole. Without Higgins' boats, not only D-Day, but hundreds of lesser-known operations just would not have been possible. They would not have succeeded. Even Nazi Führer Adolf Hitler jealously recognized Higgins' war efforts in ship production and design and bitterly dubbed him as America's new Noah. Despite this level of recognition during the war, Andrew Jackson Higgins doesn't have a lot of name recognition now. He's a far cry from being a household name. He's largely become a hidden figure in World War II history, with his work being part of one of the most important missions in worldwide military history, but the man behind that work remaining largely unknown. Let's try and change that just a bit with this week's episode. Who was Andrew Higgins? How did a boy from Columbus, Nebraska, turn into one of the most successful businessmen in the world, at least for a few years? Higgins' story is equal parts inspiring and entertaining. A pattern emerged in Higgins' life: try, fail, succeed, and persist. Higgins truly embodied the classic American rags to riches story. This week, in honor of Veterans Day, we'll take a short break from cults, murders, and similar subjects and discuss just how important Higgins was to D-Day's success, his life and his boat-making journey, and all the drama in his dealings with the U.S. government and military. In this week's Let's Take a Break from the current cultural polarization in America and look back at when we as a nation were at our best, when people of all races and creeds came together for a common cause edition of Timesuck.
This is Michael McDonald, and you're listening to Timesuck.
You're listening to Timesuck.
Well, happy Monday, happy Veterans Day, happy birthday to Lindsay Cummins, Queen of the Suck, born on Veterans Day. My beautiful wife who just turned 41, and welcome to the Cult of the Curious. I'm Dan Cummins, the master sucker, seeker, wanderer, bike rider, and you are listening to Timesuck. Hail Nimrod, hail Lucifina, praise be to good boy Bojangles, and glory be to Triple M. Recording this episode on November 6th, and I know a lot of people are celebrating, and a lot of other people are hurting. I'll share more sentiments via answering some updates at the end of the episode, but for right now, I just want to say to those of you who had your candidates win, please be gracious in victory. Gloating only adds to the divisiveness that has come to dominate modern politics and just American culture. A divisiveness that only serves politicians and their most strident acolytes and hurts literally everyone else. Divisiveness that pushes people into extremism, the kind of extremism that most of us have come to hate, that is good for no one. And for those of you whose candidates lost, let me just share a quote I really liked from Jon Stewart. He said, "We're going to come out of this election and make all kinds of pronouncements about what this country is and what this world is, and the truth is, we're not really going to know shit. This isn't the end." And he's right. It's not. The sun will rise tomorrow. There will still be noble fights to be fought. There will still be problems, so keep fighting. Don't give up or give in. Hope that you're wrong about your worst fears. Don't think those who voted differently than you did are evil and needlessly add further to the polarization that, again, serves only politicians and their most rabid fans and no one else. And do the best you can to enjoy the days you have before they're gone. And to everyone, root for things to get better for all of us. Let us all come up together. Be the light you want to see in the world. Talk to people who do not share your opinions. Be open to their opinions. Try to understand them. Have them understand you. Stay curious. Keep learning. Keep sharing what you learn. Keep believing that knowledge is power. Keep looking to the past to avoid the mistakes we've already made. Keep voting. And that's all I got for this opening little segment, you beautiful bastards. A little more at the end. A couple quick more things, and then we are off into the content. Another annual Bad Magic Giving Tree reminder. I'll again share details about when and where to apply for help later. Right now, asking for people to help others. We want to help as many families as we can, again, around the holidays, as made possible by your donations. Every little bit helps us achieve our goal of donating $40,000 to our community members in need, as we've done in the past. If you're able to give extra support this holiday season, please consider doing so by purchasing a digital Amazon gift card and sending it to GivingTree2024 at badmagicproductions.com. I will include that email in the episode description. We are accepting gift cards starting now through November 21st. All of that info can be found in today's episode description, or email us. We'll point you in the right direction. Also, congrats to Crystal G. Williams for winning this year's Bad Magic Street Team Sticker Contest. Oh, boy!
Ding! Yippee!
Crystal put a bunch of stickers in a bunch of creative places, advertising both Timesuck and Scared to Death, and we are so grateful for her efforts to bring us some extra exposure and having fun doing so. She won a $200 merch credit to the Bad Magic store, and our gratitude. Big thanks as well to longtime Bad Magic fan Austin Andrade, who took second place. He won a $50 merch credit, as did @MythicalHuhMan for taking third. Thanks to everyone else who joined in the fun. Thanks, Mythical, for doing this a couple years in a row now. I look forward to doing it again next year. One last thing, 2024 Holiday Collection Part 1, live in the Bad Magic store. Includes Bob and Yoko's holiday album tee. Bob Dylan and Yoko Ono, two of history's greatest vocalists, bring you home for the your new favorite classic holiday duet album. A perfect album to spin as you decorate your new bonsai fruit tree from Bob's Bountiful Bonsai Fruit.biz. Also have classic favorites like the Bojangles holiday sweater, the Dan Sember tee, Bad Magic Secret Santa sweater, Chikatilo's Winter Wrestling Academy, and more. Part 2 featuring felt pennants, challenge coin, and more dropping soon. So cutoff to receive items by Christmas is December 10th. Visit badmagicproductions.com to shop the 2024 holiday collection today. And now it's topic time. It was in a 1964 interview with historian Stephen Ambrose when Dwight Eisenhower called Andrew Higgins the man who won the war for us. 2 decades after the fighting was done, Eisenhower had not forgotten how large Higgins' contribution was. So let's muster up a little and examine that contribution in detail today. Nimrod demands it. Going to begin by taking a few moments to further establish just how important Higgins was to the war effort before we talk about D-Day and how his boats made D-Day possible. Then we'll spend a lot of time like a lot, most of the episode, really. Reading diary entries written by his wife, Mrs. Higgins, entries that really focus on what an incredible lover Andrew was. Entries that go into graphic, hard-to-stomach in moments detail regarding the length, weight, shape of his genitalia, the power and flexibility of his hips. Entries that scientifically break down the force of his thrusts, how the shape of his penis interacted with Mrs. Higgins' vaginal wall, how a certain callus on his pointing finger interacted with her clitoris in a way she described as, quote, ethereal, magical. It was as if he injected his very soul directly into my nervous system, to my clitoris. As the orgasm produced left my entire body quivering and convulsing, I would lose consciousness, leave my body, watch myself shaking and crying out in ecstasy, weep at the beauty of it all with the angels in heaven, then re-enter my body, grab his shaft, and, well, for any other entries like that, you're just going to have to wait. It's too much to share now. We need to build up to it. And I understand you might need time to find a place to listen to it in private because, well, you and I both know what you're going to do when you hear it. I would say, but as you know, if you've listened to the show for any length of time, I try and keep these episodes G-rated because I mostly do these shows for the kids. This is for the kids, you guys. Okay, sorry. What just happened? Blacked out for a minute or two. What I was trying to say before I rudely interrupted myself. So let's begin by taking a few moments to further establish just how important Higgins was to the war effort before we talk about D-Day and how his boats made D-Day possible. We'll go into a timeline of Higgins' life, how he got his business started, how he became involved with the military and his boats, and maybe share some of his wife's diary entries. But you have to be good. It'd be good to hear those. You have to go pee-pee in a potty, like good boys and good girls. Can't stress that enough. I don't care what fucking side of the election you were on. You can't be fucking naughty if you want to hear the entries. Anyway, Higgins mostly made a name for himself, building the boats that delivered thousands and thousands and thousands of Allied soldiers to the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. Higgins designed and produced an assembly of all kinds of different amphibious boats during the war. These were very innovative because they could deliver soldiers and supplies from ship to shore. No heavily fortified port access needed, and that was something very new. His boats eliminated the need for traditional harbors, which Hitler and his allies had heavily guarded. They could carry troops right up onto the beach, right up onto damn near any beach. Higgins built several types of specialty watercraft for the Marines and the Navy. Don't worry about remembering these terms I'm going to list now. I just want to illustrate how many different types of boats he was making for the military. He had LCTs, landing craft tank, LCAs, landing craft assault, LCPLs, landing craft personnel large, LCMs, landing craft mechanized. Did I say mechanized correctly? If I didn't, I just did. LCUs, landing craft utility, LCVs, landing craft vehicle, motor torpedo boats, aka PTs, supply vessels, and a variety of other specialized, lesser used watercraft. Just a shit ton of boats. Out of all of his boats, Higgins was best known by far for designing and manufacturing thousands of LCVPs, landing craft vehicle personnel crafts, over 20,000. The LCVP combined two previously existing types of boats, the LCPL and the LCV, to make a boat designed to carry soldiers, jeeps, and supplies to virtually any shore in the world. Again, no port needed. Higgins adapted some shallow water boats he had already designed for private use down in the bayous of Louisiana to new military specifications. He'd initially designed separate landing craft for soldiers and vehicles, LCPLs and LCVs. The LCPL had no ramp, so soldiers had to jump over the sides, but that exposed them to additional gunfire. So Higgins combined the LCP and LCV to form a new, revolutionary 36-foot LCVP, a boat that became commonly known as the Higgins boat, a boat that became famous during the war, a boat that literally might have turned the tides of the war into the Allies' favor. Each of Higgins' LCVPs could carry up to 36 dudes, or a jeep, a small truck, and equipment with less soldiers. It featured a front ramp for both people and vehicles designed to descend really almost directly onto the beach. The big wood and metal boat could still float in just 3 feet of water, and the bow of the boat, the front, could float in just over 2 feet of water, and maybe even in shallower water than that, according to some sources. According to an article in the Smithsonian, pretty damn good, thorough source, in my experience, it featured a protected propeller system that rested inside the hull that enabled the boats to maneuver in as little as 10 inches of water, which is fucking wild for a big boat carrying 36 troops. No other boat in the world at that time could haul that many troops and or equipment in a boat that could still float that close to shore. Not even close. Higgins' design's way ahead of anybody else's. His boats would be used in nearly every American amphibious operation in both the Pacific and European theaters of the war for the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. Without him, both the Navy and the Marine Corps would have had to have directly attacked heavily defended ports to get large numbers of troops onto the ground. And that might have would have likely prevented the U.S. military from supplying the nearly 2 million infantrymen who fought on the ground in Europe. Troops needed to win the war against the Germans. It would have also, and that's at one time, they had that many. They actually had many more troops in Europe overall throughout the war. The Allies did. Would have prevented the Marines from sieging the many, many islands they stormed in the South Pacific to help beat the Japanese. With the Higgins boat, military personnel had infinitely more access points to get troops onto the ground. Knowing that Allies had these boats changed the defense strategy of the Axis powers tremendously. Now they had to defend far more shoreline than they otherwise would have, which stretched out and thinned their resources considerably, did not allow them to amass large concentrations of troops and fortifications in just any one defensive position. Taking away the Axis powers' ability to heavily fortify a very limited number of ports, and then use excess troops in order to continue taking over more territory, dramatically changed the way the entire war was fought. They had to be far more defensive-minded, the Axis powers did. And again, Higgins' boat's instrumental to this change. What makes Higgins' story extra interesting is that the Navy was initially very uninterested in his products, but Higgins was persistent, doggedly so. He knew he was a better lover than other boat builders. And we know that now thanks to his wife's diary entries. But seriously, he did know that his products were superior to existing military naval technology at the time and better than boats produced by more established shipyards. Truly, no one understood how to build a big boat that could operate in shallow, debris-filled water like Andrew Higgins. With the U.S. Navy, he just had a hard time proving that. They were incredibly reluctant to lean on his comparatively small company, a company that became huge when they finally awarded him some big government contracts. In 1938, Higgins owned a single boatyard with less than 75 employees. 5 years later, by the end of 1943, after some big government contracts, he owned 7 big manufacturing plants that had over 25,000 employees. That's insane growth. The war turned the small Louisiana boat builder into a massive industrialist, with annual sales exceeding $120 million. Higgins' employees would end up building over 20,000 boats for the Allies. Over 12,500 of them were Higgins boats. And that's according to one source. According to some other sources, he built over 20,000 Higgins boats alone. Sources for his boat specifically, as far as like the numbers built, vary a little more than I was expecting. Higgins built all kinds of boats. By the time the war was over, he built PT boats that contained anti-aircraft machine guns, smokescreen devices, depth charges, and compressed air-fired torpedo tubes. He also made anti-submarine boats, dispatch boats, 170-foot freight supply vessels, and more. And he designed a lot of that stuff himself. By the time he died, less than a decade after the war's conclusion, Higgins held 30 amphibious landing craft and vehicle patents, and his name was known around the world. For his and his company's efforts, Higgins Industries received an Army Navy E, the highest award a company could get from the military. Raymond Moley, an FDR advisor, as in the FDR, the president, President Roosevelt, wrote in Newsweek in 1943, "It is Higgins himself who takes your breath away. Higgins is an authentic master builder with the kind of willpower, brains, drive, and daring that characterized the American empire builders of an earlier generation." Okay. Now that we've established just how important Higgins was to the war effort, let's talk specifically about D-Day and how his boats made D-Day possible. D-Day was part of a military mission known as Operation Overlord, the largest land, air, and sea operation ever conducted, as in ever in the history of the world's warfare. The maneuvers that occurred specifically on D-Day were codenamed Operation Neptune, and Operation Neptune is considered one of the greatest military achievements of all time. On June 6, 1944, an Allied force consisting of over 150,000 soldiers, 5,000 ships, and 800 aircraft attacked 50 miles of Normandy coastline in northern France. When it was all over, more than 4,000 Allied soldiers died, and an additional 6,000 plus were injured, but the Allies had succeeded in breaching France's coastal defenses. D-Day was the very beginning of the Allied invasion of Northwest Europe. Without it, Hitler would have almost certainly launched a ground invasion of the UK, and then after that, who knows what he would have done. In total, on that one day, about 73,000 U.S. troops made it onto European soil. The Allies landed more than 150,000 troops in total, including a significant number of both British and Canadian forces, all in one day. And that day led directly to the Allies pushing the Nazis further and further east, all the way to Berlin, and to the death of Hitler and the end of Nazi fascism. And here's what led up to D-Day. In May of 1940, Germany invaded and began to occupy northwestern France. Just 2 years later, 1942, the Nazis were at the height of their power. Germany and its allies now controlled large portions of both Europe and northern Africa. German armies had set up their brutal police states everywhere, imprisoning and murdering millions of innocent people. But 2 more years later, by 1944, Hitler had lost his hold on Stalingrad, and the Axis powers began losing their control of North Africa and Italy. They'd expanded too fast in too many directions, stretched their resources too thin. It did not account for how brutal a Russian winter could be or how reckless Stalin would be when it came to sacrificing the lives of millions of Russia's young men, just throwing troop after troop after troop carelessly, recklessly at the Nazis to make sure that Hitler did not take Moscow. And now, seeking to ride newfound momentum, Allied military leaders began planning a full invasion of Western Europe with the intention of spreading Germany's defenses even thinner and ideally turning the war decisively in their favor. By the summer of 1944, the Allies had decided to concentrate their efforts on Western France to fight Hitler. The D-Day invasion was planned for over 2 years. History.com described it as a full-scale invasion designed to push the Nazis back into Germany. No amphibious mission of its size had ever been attempted. Britain's Winston Churchill pleaded with Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower and President Roosevelt to pursue a less dangerous strategy, emphasizing placing soldiers in Italy and southern France instead. He was worried that the defensive perimeter Hitler had his men build on the shores of western France would be too difficult to penetrate, that it would be a bloodbath if soldiers tried to storm those beaches. But future U.S. President Eisenhower, the Allied forces' supreme commander in Europe, would not be swayed. He felt that Normandy provided the best, most straightforward path east into Germany. Eisenhower knew that his biggest obstacle to D-Day success was that Germany had already built an Atlantic Wall defense system consisting of roughly 2,400 miles of heavily fortified bunkers, landmines, beach and water obstacles. Over 260,000 laborers, most of them prisoners, had built this so-called wall over 2 years' time. This defensive wall comprised roughly 6.5 million mines, thousands of concrete bunkers and pillboxes containing heavy and fast-firing artillery, tens of thousands of tank ditches, and other formidable beach obstacles. And the German army would be dug in on the cliffs overlooking the American landing beaches. Also, Eisenhower knew that Hitler was waiting for him to attack. By November of 1943, Hitler was well aware of the threat of an invasion on northern France. He had put Erwin Rommel, the infamous Desert Fox, who had made a name for himself and as a very successful tank commander in northern Africa, in charge of leading defense operations in the area. Rommel was tasked with overseeing the completion of the Atlantic Wall. And the Allies knew that they would have to overcome Rommel's widely respected, brilliant military mind with Operation Overlord. And what was Operation Overlord? The operations plan at its core was very simple. It was described as distract and attack. If all went according to plan, heavy aerial bombing would first take out key Nazi gun positions and destroy important roads and bridges. That would cut off a possible Nazi retreat and prevent incoming reinforcements. Allied paratroopers would drop in and secure important inland positions. Then over 150,000 amphibious infantrymen, primarily from Britain, Canada, and the United States, would land on the shore to overwhelm the German defenses. They would storm 5 beaches they had named Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. But then, during the invasion, Allied bombers failed to destroy important Nazi artillery bunkers, especially on Omaha Beach. Most of the paratroopers missed their marks because of the clouds. Many ended up getting stuck in lagoons or shot midair by German snipers. The seas were far rougher than anticipated, and many boats landed off course or sank before they even reached land. And yet overall, Operation Overlord's Operation Neptune was a massive success. How? Let's walk through D-Day step by step. Big steps, broad strokes, but still. The Allies had been preparing a deception campaign for months ahead of storming France's beaches. That campaign, known as Operation Fortitude, would convince the Nazis that the real landing site would be along the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point between Britain and France. Pas de Calais. General George Patton led a dummy army of hundreds of inflatable decoy tanks and airplanes to trick spy planes. I love that deception. The Allies also faked radio transmissions and planted German double agents. They did all of this so successfully that when the soldiers invaded Normandy, Hitler thought they were faking him out to distract him from a real invasion in Calais. Why would they do this to me? Why so tricksy, so naughty? What a bunch of naughty boys. Why won't this fight fair? A clean fight, that's what I want. They fucking got him good. In early June of 1944, just a few weeks before the invasion, over 2 million American and 250,000 Canadian soldiers arrived in England to prepare for the mission. The U.S. military shipped 7 million tons of supplies to the staging area. Over 2,250,000 soldiers. Man. And that doesn't count all the tens of thousands of British troops that would also be involved. A limited number of troops from Australia, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, France, Greece, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, even from Poland would be involved in some way or another. And then after years of planning, after the accumulation of a couple million military personnel, Mother Nature almost ruined D-Day for the Allies. You just can't really plan for weather, and a big storm nearly threw everything off. D-Day was supposed to take place on June 4th. On that day in 1944, the Allied commanders gathered in England for a meeting. They were just a few hours before they were supposed to launch. And then Captain James Stagg, Chief Meteorological Officer, we just learned about meteorology in the military a few weeks ago with some cool updates, urged a last-minute delay. The Royal Navy, British Meteorological Office, the U.S. Strategic and Tactical Air Force were responsible for monitoring and predicting the English Channel's weather. And on May 29th, observations from Newfoundland indicated that a storm was going to arrive on Invasion Day. Stagg knew the storm was just a few hours away, and he got Allied Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower to agree to a 24-hour delay and move the invasion to June 5th. Allied forces were nervous to move the invasion at all. They only had a 3-day window for the invasion in June, so any delay was beyond stressful. They needed optimal weather conditions, but paratroopers also needed the light of the full moon, or a moon close to the full moon, to see their marks, and amphibious soldiers needed a low tide to expose the Germans' underwater defenses. So they couldn't delay things for long. Nevertheless, Eisenhower was eventually persuaded to push back the invasion an additional day to the edge of their availability window to June 6th. Even then, the weather was still a long ways from perfect, but he decided in the end that was a good thing. He believed the Nazis would never expect an attack during a storm. Nazi meteorologists had predicted that the rough seas would not abate until mid-June, so they definitely were not expecting an invasion attempt for at least a few more weeks. However, the Allies had better meteorologists and a more advanced weather detecting system. Their station in Blacksod Point, Ireland, detected a brief lull in the storm that would allow for a June 6th invasion. And Captain James Stagg, the chief meteorological officer, informed Eisenhower of this opportunity. Eisenhower approved Operation Overlord for June 6th, and it was on like Donkey Kong. Despite all the weather problems on the day of the invasion, Stagg later informed Eisenhower that if they would have waited an additional few weeks for their next supposed good weather window, low tide and full moon, they would have been forced to operate in the worst weather conditions in the English Channel in 2 decades. Eisenhower later thanked, quote, the gods of war for acting when they did. And by gods of war, I am 99% sure he was talking about Nimrod and Bojangles specifically. In the early morning hours of June 6, 18,000 American and British paratroopers attempted to drop behind the beachfront bulwarks to cut off supply roads, bridges, and inland defenses. Due to a dense fog, high winds, and intense enemy gunfire, many of them were forced to jump at high speeds from low-flying planes. And a lot of the soldiers missed their landing marks. Some of them were carrying over 200 pounds of equipment and drowned in marshes that were created by Nazi engineers. Others were shot out of the sky. Luckily, most lived and were not wounded. Of the more than 23,000 Allied paratroopers and glider troops that landed in Normandy on D-Day, some 800 were casualties. Over 22,000 might not have landed in the exact right spots, but landed, alive and well. Most divisions did land successfully and were able to destroy some strategic bridges. Now it's time for the Operation Neptune part of Operation Overlord, largest amphibious invasion in history. At 6:30 a.m., nearly 160,000 soldiers, 6,000 ships and landing vessels made by renowned lover Andrew motherfucking Higgins, and around 13,000 supporting aircraft made their invasions of the 5 beaches. But then many of the landing crafts were pushed off course, and many of the nearly 300 amphibious tanks deployed were swamped by high waves. And because some bombers had failed to take out German artilleries, Juneau and Omaha still heavily defended by the Nazis. Omaha soldiers suffered heavy casualties as they stormed into direct fire, just popping out of those boats into heavy gunfire. Approximately 2,400 Allied troops would die on Omaha Beach on D-Day alone. At Juneau, the first waves of Canadian soldiers were shot down en masse. 340 Canadian troops would die trying to take that beach that day. At Utah, Gold, and Sword, soldiers faced rough seas and gunfire, but fewer casualties. Wave after wave of soldiers died, but there were still more waves of soldiers behind them, and they did manage to push forward and win all of the beaches. All of them. In total, there were over 12,000 casualties at D-Day, a number representing all those killed, wounded, or missing. Americans suffered 8,230 of that total. Between 4,000 and 9,000 German troops were killed, wounded, or went missing that day, and a fucking bunch of them retreated. Rommel the Desert Fox, not one of the casualties. He was not there. He was on leave. He just was that unfazed about an Allied invasion in early June, just didn't think it was even a possibility. And Hitler, still believing it was a fake attack, he refused to release nearby soldiers to join the counterattack. He called in reinforcements from much further away instead, a big blunder, because it gave the Allies time to get their bearings, transport more troops and equipment onto the beaches. By June 30th, the Allies will have landed over 850,000 men, 148,000 vehicles, and 570,000 tons of supplies in Normandy. Within 5 days of D-Day, by June 11th, all the beaches were secured. In total, D-Day involved more than 326,000 military personnel, 50,000 vehicles, and 100,000 tons of equipment. They did it. They breached Hitler's wall and were taking back territory for the Nazis in mainland Europe. And this was huge, major, crucial step towards an Allied victory against the Nazis and the Axis powers. Eisenhower said in that same 1964 interview I referenced a quote from earlier, "If Higgins had not designed and built those LCVPs, we never could have landed over an open beach. The whole strategy of the war would have been different." That's crazy. The whole strategy of the war would have been different. The Battle of Normandy led directly to the end of the war. Mainly because of that successful mission, the Allies will eventually put around 8 million Allied troops into Europe during World War II. Following D-Day, Germany would dedicate most of their soldiers and supplies to Western France, which led to their defenses being weakened elsewhere in Europe, which was huge. Less than 3 months after D-Day, on August 25th, 1944, the Allied soldiers, with the help of the French resistance, led by General and future President of France, Charles de Gaulle, freed Paris from 4 years of Nazi occupation. Huge, crushing blow to Hitler's global domination ambitions. And that symbolic victory marked a massive turning point in the war. On December 16th, 1944, just over 6 months after D-Day, the Allies fought in the Battle of the Bulge, which was the last major German offensive effort fought on the Western Front. Hitler had sent roughly 250,000 men across Luxembourg to fight the Allied forces. They advanced 50 miles into Allied lines, creating the so-called bulge in their defenses, but then they got fucking crushed. On January 16th, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was over, and Germany, after suffering over 100,000 casualties, retreated once again. Now they began to lose more and more supplies while the Allies advanced and slowly encroached on more and more of their recently conquered territory. By March of 1945, German forces were finally retreating all the way back into Germany, and U.S. soldiers on the Western Front were crossing the Rhine River. On April 30th, 1945, less than a year after D-Day, Soviet forces from the Eastern Front had encircled Berlin, and inside a bomb-proof bunker, Hitler poisoned his mistress Eva Braun and then shot himself. His body was quickly cremated in the garden. On May 7th, 1945, still less than a year from D-Day, General Dwight Eisenhower accepted Germany's unconditional surrender at Reims, France. At midnight, May 8th, 1945, the war in Europe was officially over. The Allied forces, while they still had Japan to contend with, celebrated a monumental victory against Nazi hate and aggression, and it all started, really, with D-Day. And D-Day would not have worked without the new and improved troop and supply hauling technology, the boats designed by Andrew Magic Calloused Finger Higgins. You get it. So now with this important context established, let's take a good long detailed look at Andrew Jackson Higgins' life from beginning to end in this week's Timesuck Timeline.
Strap on those boots, soldier. We're marching down a Timesuck timeline.
On August 28, 1886, Andrew Jackson Higgins, born in what was the little town, now the small city, of Columbus, Nebraska. Located 90 miles west and slightly north of Omaha, Columbus had about 2,500 people when Andrew was born there. The city has close to 45 million people now. I was shocked to come across that number. No, has about 25,000 people. Sorry, I often confuse the numbers 25,000 and 45 million. I'm sure that's super common. Andrew is the most notable of Columbus's notable people, but not the most known in recent years. Not even close. Lucas Cruikshank, who created the Fred series on YouTube, where he played the interesting, I'll say that, character of Fred Figglehorn. Born and raised in Columbus. Nickelodeon made 3 separate movies based on Fred. My wife, Lindsay, actually worked as the set costumer on Fred 2, Night of the Living Fred. Here's a little taste of Fred from a video from 16 years ago that got 80 million views. A video shot in Columbus, Nebraska.
Hey, it's Fred! And it's really nice out, so I think I'm gonna go swimming later. My mom found this really cool pool at the dump. It's really big and really deep. I think I might drown. And also, I got a letter in the mail. It might be from my dad. To Fred.
So that's how you get 80 million views. That's Fred. That's the guy who overtook the man who did more than any other private citizen to defeat Hitler. To become the most famous person from Columbus, Nebraska. Okay. Andrew's parents were John Higgins and Annie Long O'Connor Higgins. John Higgins was a, quote, staunch Democrat, so much so that he named his son after President Andrew Jackson. He was also a prominent lawyer, judge, editor of the Columbus Dispatch, and even a friend of President Grover Cleveland at one time. Andrew's father, John, had been born on April 2nd, 1841 in Marseilles, Illinois. Not Marseille, of course not. No, it's got to be Marseilles. He went to law school at Chicago University and was admitted to the bar in Ottawa, Illinois. And he married Annie Long O'Connor in October of 1869. More on Annie in a bit. In 1870, John left a Chicago law firm with the intention to start his own practice in California. But while traveling along the Union Pacific Railroad, he passed through Columbus because the Chicago Times had requested he stop in Columbus to interview retired Indian Scout Major Frank North. John worked for the Times as a part-time reporter during school and still took assignments from them for some extra money. And John intended on only spending a few days in the bustling little town of Columbus, a town that was small but growing rapidly. And then he fell in love with the town. And I love curveballs like that, right? Something unexpectedly just dramatically changes the course of someone's life. John loved Columbus so much he convinced his wife, Annie, that they should abandon their dreams in California and stay in Nebraska instead, and she agreed. So instead of opening a law practice somewhere along the beaches of the West Coast, he opened one in the cornfields. And after serving as a lawyer for several years, Higgins Sr. built up enough of a good reputation in the area that he was appointed as a judge. And his previous journalism experience led to him getting a job as an editor of the Columbus Democrat. He'll never leave Columbus, dying there in 1893 at the age of 52. I'll explain how he died in a bit. Right now, let's just meet his Andrew's mom. Annie Long Mary O'Connor Higgins, quite the name, born in 1850 in LaSalle County, Illinois. She will leave Columbus later in life, but be buried in Columbus next to her husband, after passing away in New Orleans on November 2nd, 1924. Annie is described as having been courageous, gifted, and versatile. She was skilled in the arts and sciences and ensured her children received a classic education. Annie was reportedly a descendant of O'Connor of Connacht, who in 1848 was a major player in an Irish rebellion against the British. O'Connor escaped and fled to America, and Higgins always said he got his determination, strong will, and building skills from his mom's side of the family. Andrew was the youngest of 10 children. Not surprised for a guy born in 1886, since that was a norm back then. Still makes me squirm to hear about a family that big. Man, raising 2 kids in a co-parenting situation, no less, is just so much work. 10? Guessing mom and dad weren't going to all their games. Also, I guess they probably didn't have a lot of games to go to, since American football wasn't quite yet being played in high school. Little League wasn't a thing yet. For baseball, basketball, still a few years away from even being invented. Volleyball, a few more years away from being invented. And kids were dying left and right back then. Still, even if half of them, died. That's a lot of mouths sitting around the dinner table. Andrew's siblings were Bessie, Joy, Edward B., Frank, Pansy, Mammy, John, Andrea, and Kathleen. And he really did have a sister named Pansy. Pansy Anna Higgins. She'd go by Pat. She would live to the age of 84. And she'll also end up, like her brother and mother, in New Orleans. Little John, born January 24th, 1871. And sadly, he died at the age of 3 on July 21st, 1874, of inflammatory dysentery, which was his, quote, first and only serious illness. Kathleen, born October of 1887, sadly died as an infant June 24th, 1888, when Andrew, not quite 2 years old. Joy Montgomery, born December 13th, 1874, also will end up in New Orleans, die there at the age of 84. Frank, born October 5th, 1878, he also will end up in New Orleans and die at the age of 78. Mary Campbell, a.k.a. Mammy, born December 24th, 1883, died at the age of 73, also buried in the family tomb in New Orleans. Eddie, born September 16th, 1876, will die when Andrew was just 8 years old. In 1894, at the age of 18, he was buried in Columbus next to his father. And what a super weird death he had. If I hadn't been able to find an old newspaper article from Columbus from 1894, I would have thought this was like some kind of weird joke. Some barking dogs woke him up the night he died, woke him up again by the sounds of it, and he was real irritated about this. He was so irritated, he grabbed a revolver he had on a shelf in his closet, intent on shooting said dogs. Being half asleep and grabbing the gun in the dark, he grabbed the gun backwards with the barrel pointed at himself, accidentally pulled the trigger, shot himself right in the damn forehead. And maybe this makes me a terrible person, but I laughed really hard when I first read that, and so did Bojangles. What a crazy sequence of events. He died almost instantly. He fell down, tried to grab the shelf, pulled a bunch of shit down on top of his dead, crouching body. That's a fucking crazy early memory for Andrew. Just wait, what? How did your brother die? Poor Andrea died as an infant 2 years before Andrew was born. And Bessie, Andrew's much older sister, born in 1872 when he was 14, she'd live into the age of 80. Die in Miami, Ohio. Big family. And Andrew grew up as the baby of the family. Since his only younger sibling, his younger sister Kathleen, she died as an infant. August 27th, 1946, almost exactly a year after the conclusion of World War II, Higgins would return to Columbus with 3 of his sisters and be the featured speaker for the city's 90th birthday. In a speech, he would say, "The town where I was born, no matter how long the absence, when a man utters these words, his heartstrings are touched. Whether the town be the habitat of generations or chosen by his parents, as in my case, it makes little difference. My parents chose and loved Columbus. I was a young child when I left Columbus, but my heart warms at the thought and mentions of its name. Here in this sod, my parents and brothers and sisters lie in that growing community of valiant pioneers, their sons and daughters." Pretty cute that he still cared about Columbus that much, considering he didn't really live there that long. A tragedy would lead to him moving away. A tragedy with his dad. On November 7th, 1893, Andrew's father, John, fell down a flight of stairs and died of a head injury. Just a random freak accident. Columbus Journal wrote, he and his son Edward had been rooming together for some time. The son had been engaged in writing during the whole evening and into the night and went out to see where his father was, and was horrified to find him lying on the 4th step from the bottom of the iron stairway, his head downward, his face toward the wall, and his feet protruding through the balustrade on the south side of the stairway. The only marks upon his person were slight bruises on the left cheek and the left ear. Damn. Andrew just 7 when that happened. His brother Eddie, that was with his dad, he'll die just over a year later, November 26, 1894. As a kid, both his dad and older brother died in the house in freak accidents. How is that going to affect your view on life? I would guess it could push you to do everything while you still can, because you truly understand that it can all go away just in an instant. That even when you're home and not sick, the Reaper can still swing through at any moment. Following her husband's death, Annie moves her 5 children, still living at home, to Omaha, Nebraska. And now life for Annie is pretty tough. The Andrew Jackson Higgins Memorial Foundation wrote money was scarce and times were hard. Nevertheless, Annie still gave little Andrew and her other children a good childhood. Higgins loved growing up in Omaha. Decades later, in 1943, he spoke to the Omaha Chamber of Commerce, and he said if it had not been for the Missouri River at Omaha, there would have been no Higgins Industries of New Orleans, turning out ships, planes, engines, guns, and what have you for the Army and Navy. Looking at the Missouri shallows, its snags and driftwood, he says, led him to think up his first shallow draft boat. Everything else came from that. In 1895, when Higgins was 9, he got his first job to help his mom support the family. That's so fucking crazy to me. Kids did it all the time in the 19th century. Just started working at the age of 9. 1800s were so different than now in so many ways. His mom bought him a sickle, and he walked around town looking for grass-cutting jobs. That's wild. Imagine mowing an entire lawn at any age with a sickle. And he did it at the age of 9. God, I just picture a little 9-year-old with fucking shredded shoulders, just jacked. How'd you get those big shoulders, Andy?
And been sickling. Mm-hmm. Doing a lot of sickling. Some folks call it a sling blade. I call it a sickle blade. Mm-hmm.
Did he always dress up like the Grim Reaper when he cut the grass? Grim Reaper loves a sickle. Andrew eventually saved up enough money to buy a lawnmower, but not one with an engine like we have now. Now, this is the late 1800s. Just a bunch of spinning blades he had to push to make spin. Still sucked. Then showing the business acumen that would later make him an important historical figure, he reinvested. He's a fucking 9-year-old. And he reinvested some of his initial profits back into his business. And over a few years' time, he would purchase 17 lawnmowers and hire numerous older boys to do the labor for him while he managed the jobs and their clients. That's like something out of a movie. Imagine having a 10-year-old boss. Imagine being fired by a 10-year-old if you're like 16 or 18. Jerry, can you come into my office, please? I guess it wouldn't be that voice, right? He's a 10-year-old. Jerry, can you come into my office, please? Sure, Andy. Yeah, I gotta say, I'm really disappointed in your effort lately for work. Keep showing up late. We've got several complaints, shoddy work. You don't seem to care about doing a subpar job. I was thinking about you a lot when I was at WWII today, and when Mrs. Norberg was showing me how to do my fractions, and I'm just gonna have to let you go. Please, Andy. No, give me another chance. I got kids to feed. One of them's in your class, I think. In 1898, Andrew started another business. Of course he did. He's 12 now. It's time to expand his horizons. He started organizing paper routes for the Omaha Daily News. At first, like with his lawn mowing business, he delivered the papers himself, but then he quickly moved on to selling subscriptions and collecting payments. And then he hired workers to do the running around for him while he took on a supervisory role. I feel like a piece of shit. I was doing nothing. 12. What was I doing at 12? I don't know, starting to jerk off. Trying to watch as many cartoons as I could. Still secretly playing with my G.I. Joes a lot. He reportedly earned about $100 a month from this business venture, and then in 1899, when he's 13, he sells his paper business to an adult for $1,700, the equivalent of $65,000 today. He's a child prodigy. He accomplished more by the age of 13 than I think I did by the age of 35. He accomplished more by the age of 13 than a lot of people accomplish in their whole life. Backing up a year, when Andrew was 12, he designed and built his first boat in the basement of his house. Yeah, fuck it, why not? You know, like your typical 12-year-old, he built a working boat in his family's basement. Higgins had bought a small wrecked sailboat from a lake near his house and decided he was going to figure out how to repair it himself. He named the boat Patience because he figured he would need a bunch of patience to complete his project. And when he was done, he wasn't quite happy with how slow Patience was, though. He wanted something more fun. So now he decides to convert Patience into a bobsled so he can sail her across the ice. And then he gets bored with that. And now he decides to build himself a motorboat. He began constructing this motorboat in his basement, and he named it Annie-O after his mom. And then when he was finished, he realized he couldn't get the boat out of the basement. It's too big. And then check out what he did next. I've never heard of a kid doing anything like this. He gathered up some friends, borrowed Jackson timbers from a wrecking yard, built supports for his basement's front wall, then removed an entire section of his mother's basement wall, brought the boat out, relaid the bricks, returned the equipment, and apparently he did a great job. And did all of that before his mom returned home from a trip. And then the Annie-O, huge success. She could reach speeds up to 60 miles an hour on Lake Carter, allegedly, near Omaha, which is absurd. That is hauling ass on a boat. Fastest I've gone on a boat is about, 45, 50 miles an hour. Felt like the equivalent of doing 90 in a car on the freeway. 1900, now 14-year-old Andrew enrolls in Omaha's Creighton High School prep, or Creighton's high prep school. That's how it's written in the source. After already having lived a full life, but it's a prep high school. By this time, he has 2 kids with his ex-wife. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's gone prematurely bald. He's the world's oldest 14-year-old. No, that feels possible. He hadn't done all that, but he had gotten into a lot of fights. He was a scrappy dude. Before enrolling, Higgins had already been expelled from other schools for fighting and skipping classes. Andrew always hated school. Never tried much. He did like to read and learn, but only on his own terms. He was that rare kid who was actually too smart for school. Got bored easily. He first attended Farman School, Farman School, then Central High. When he quit Central High, Annie enrolled him in the Father Williams Episcopal School in St. Barnabas Church. He got in trouble there for more fighting and skipping. When he was in class, he was extremely disruptive. One neighbor reported that she often saw Annie marching Andrew to school. Eventually, his teachers expelled him from Father Williams, and then he gets to Creighton. And he hates Creighton just as much as his previous schools. But he did like playing on the varsity football team. He later said he played rather indifferent football, thanks to a hernia about as big as a plug hat. He would eventually earn an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Creighton in 1943, but only because he'd become a big deal in the boat building world, and now they chose to honor the man who they didn't think much of when he was a student. He dropped out of Creighton after his junior year to join the 2nd Nebraska Infantry, a National Guard regiment previously commanded by a man named William Jennings Bryan. His mother, Annie, admired Bryan, and Higgins, who adored his mom, joined the Nebraska militia mostly because of her. As part of the Nebraska militia regiment, Higgins received amphibious training on the Platte River. He and his fellow troops had to cross the Platte by pontoon. The young boat builder loved it. This focus on fighting on or in the water, combined with his interest in reading, led to Higgins becoming fascinated with military history. Higgins gathered dozens of books on military strategy and cited John Paul Jones, a Scottish-born American naval officer, then referred to as the father of the American Navy, who served in the Continental Navy during the American Revolutionary War, as his hero. Higgins quickly worked his way up to the rank of sergeant major, and in 1904, his battalion drill team won a national competition at the St. Louis Fair. They won an $800 national prize. 1904, Higgins, now 18, quit his part-time work in Wyoming logging camps. Oh yeah, did I mention that? Did I mention that he's also been logging for years? Oh yeah, he started logging at the age of 15 in his free time. From 1902 to 1904, he spent his summers in Wyoming working as a logger. Of course he did. This work instilled in him a love of wilderness, and he learned the basics of the timber industry. But after a few summers of doing that, Higgins wanted to work closer to home. So then he got a job as a truck driver for M.E. Smith & Company, a dry goods wholesaler based in Omaha. And within 7 months, the teenager became house superintendent. He's now in charge of much older men. And in less than 2 years under his watch, the company's business doubled. His employer would attribute the success directly to Higgins. In 1906, Higgins, now a 20-year-old, who's had more jobs than some 60-year-olds. He moved south to pursue a career in the lumber industry. Higgins said, "I came south because I loved boats and forestry." He would work in the lumber industry until 1928. He became known as a lone wolf. He would work for people just long enough to learn something new, find something else, find something to entertain himself. Once he kind of figured that out, he'd move on to something else. This guy will just build up a resume that'll read like a book. When he first moved south, the young man bought a farm and timber acreage in Mobile County, Alabama, with his savings. Also enrolled in a 3-month farming course at Auburn University. Then he opened his own sawmill to process his own timber. Higgins would frequently go into Mobile to sell his lumber and buy more supplies. And on one of these trips, he went with a friend to a band concert at the Bienville Square, which is still there in Mobile. There, he was introduced to a, quote, beautiful young brunette named Angèle Leona Colson, according to a biography on Andrew written by Jerry E. Strahan. Angèle was the daughter of a rancher and furniture store owner. Higgins was smitten with her immediately and now rode his horse into town to see her a few nights a week. Yeah, Angèle, Angele, it's a French name. I doubt it was pronounced like it would be in France here in the States, but I can't find a video of anybody saying it in American English. So rather than possibly just continually butchering it or mispronouncing it, I'm going to call her Angie going forward. October 16th, 1908, now a 22-year-old Higgins marries 19-year-old Angie, moves her into his farm. They will go on to have 6 kids together, and she will spend most of the next 40-plus years of her life writing in her very smutty, I guess, maybe is the way we could be described, diary. October 17th, 1908. How do I truly describe the carnal bliss and sensual heights that Andrew, sweet, strong, rough yet gentle, firm but forgiving Andrew, took me to on our first night in our new home? Oh, his penis is like a rattlesnake. You never know when it's going to strike. But it's a strike with a bite that, while scary, is what you want. You want to be bitten. It's what you crave. It's what you start to need. And this
The snake isn't cold, it's warm, it's hot, it's comforting, it's slightly painful, but a good kind of pain, a full, fulfilling, throbbing, joyous pain. And the snake spits not venom, but a salty life-creating sweet syrup. I just want to rub it all over my body. I want to impregnate not just my ovaries, but my skin, all of it. My stomach, my thighs, my breasts. Oh God, I hear my lover approach for yet another round. The only thing Andrew is better at than building boats and chopping down trees is making me come and weaken my knees.
That's fucking crazy that people used to write like that in 1908. I mean, Angie didn't. I wrote that, but maybe somebody else wrote like that back then. I don't know. Higgins wanted to expand his business after he got married. Of course he did. That's what he does. This dude's clearly never content just to coast. So he purchased an old schooner. He was planning to use it to import unfinished tropical woods and transport finished lumber to different markets. He repaired the ship himself, and he named it Angel. I wish he would have named it Angie. Damn it. Now still just 20 years old, Higgins owned and operated a profitable lumber business and farmed down on the Gulf Coast. Unfortunately, a hurricane swept through the area just a few months later, destroyed most of his equipment. Then an economic depression forced him to sell his farm, and Andrew and Angie moved into Mobile, arriving in town with only 16 cents and a mandolin, according to his biography. Son of a bitch! Dude has done nothing but work his ass off, and just kick-ass entrepreneurially since he was literally 9 years old. Then Mother Nature colludes with economic forces to wipe him out. And sometimes, despite your best efforts to avoid pitfalls, life just decides you're getting kicked in the dick. McCarthy, of course, did not just lay down and complain about how unfair life could be. He already knew how unfair life could be when both his father and brother died like they did. He got right back up, shook off that dick kick, started rebuilding. Man, resiliency, such a common core trait of successful people. Over the next couple decades, Higgins would lose his entire savings several times due to additional hurricanes and further economic troubles, but he never gave up. He was determined to become a shipping industry titan. At one point, he pawned the mandolin to get some cash for basic necessities. At another point, he took a notoriously dangerous job that paid well because of how dangerous it was. Worked as a hooker-on for timber loading. Worked this job for a short time and claimed to develop a new type of hook that saved lives and reduced accidents while timber was being loaded onto logging trucks, barges, etc. On October 30th, 1909, Higgins' first son, Edmund C. Higgins, was born in Mobile. Many years later, Eddie, named for Andrew's brother who died perhaps, would go on to play a key role in Higgins Industries. Meanwhile, Higgins was learning about the shipping industry through work experience. He took a job as a bill of lading clerk for a steamship company. He prepared bills of lading for shipments, recorded the items being shipped, and kept records of the shipments. Lading, by the way, just another way of saying loading, really, as in loading cargo onto a ship. Next, he got a job in the foreign exchange department of a bank so he could learn about international business. After that, Higgins worked as a timber cruiser, a timber estimator, a timber buyer, a timber inspector. Just kept taking different jobs to learn everything he could. So when he went back into business for himself, he would have that much better odds of being successful. Man, so pragmatic, strategic, methodical. Really admire his approach. Admire his patience too, right? And his vision. He did not rush into his next venture. He forced himself to be thorough, to delay some gratification. Clearly also did not mind disappointing people and pissing them off when he left that, a job early and moved on to the next one. Eventually, he was hired as chief technical inspector for the Gulf Coast Exporters Association. Spent a few months there and then quit again once he had learned, what he wanted to know towards pursuing his goal of owning a lumber exporting and manufacturing business. And why the lumber business? Because it was potentially highly profitable and would allow him to work on his beloved boats at the same time. In 1910, now 24-year-old Higgins, he's only 24 after all that shit. Him and his wife moved from Mobile, Alabama to New Orleans, Louisiana. And yes, again, he worked all those additional jobs by the age of 24, just hustling. In NOLA, Higgins got a job managing Phil I. Adam, a German firm of lumber importers. Higgins was quickly promoted to general manager, job that allowed him to travel extensively, make a bunch of important overseas contracts. Contacts. So he's traveling overseas now. May 7th, 1915, Higgins quit working for Phil L. Adam. It's L or I. Sorry, just the way it's written in sources. Sometimes I capital I. I'm like, are you capital I? Or are you a lowercase L? You motherfucker. I think it's I. Let's say I. Phil I. Adam. Not that anybody really cares, but I want to be accurate. He quit not because he had already figured out what he needed to know, but because of the sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British passenger ship sunk by a German torpedo, resulting in great loss of life. Of the 1,960 passengers and crew aboard the Lusitania at the time of the sinking, 1,197 lost their lives, 128 of which were Americans. And now Higgins no longer felt comfortable working for a German company, as World War I is getting going. His biographer, Strahan, wrote, evidently his views on America's position towards World War I were in contrast to those held by his employer. Higgins didn't just leave because of tensions between the U.S. and Germany. He also left for economic opportunities elsewhere. Before he quit, a local businessman, William Cady, loaned Higgins $5,000 to start his own lumber and exporting company. Cady would financially support the venture, Higgins would operate the business, and they'd split the profits. So now Higgins got to work on his own venture again, and he still had that hard-earned entrepreneurial magic inside of him. Within 90 days, they profited $15,000, much more than expected, and now Cady decides to incorporate. Higgins and Cady each reinvest $5,000, and a new investor, J.S. McNary, invest an undisclosed sum to become an equal partner. The very next year in 1916, the new incorporated business operating as A.J. Higgins Lumber and Export Co. makes $400,000. And Higgins' money problems are now behind him for the moment. But he doesn't stop hustling. Higgins, now 30 years old, specializes in exporting southern pine and cypress and importing Central American, African, and Philippine hardwoods. Selling that expensive-ass exotic wood to wealthy clients. He was also doing the exporting with his own schooners and brigantines now. At one point, he will have the largest sailing fleet in the whole country doing this. And soon Higgins constructs a repair yard in New Orleans to service his boats and build them to save some money. And just because he enjoys it. Higgins, now a wildly successful businessman, is acting as manager and vice president of his company. His biographer Strahan writes, he was a strikingly handsome man standing 5 feet 11 inches with blue eyes and wavy light brown hair. He was strong and rugged, but his face projected a boyish appearance. The appearance was deceiving, for beneath the youthful face was an impatient, never-accept-no individual with an explosive Irish temper. Also beneath the innocent face was a talented salesman, a great storyteller, and a man with remarkable charisma. Sounds like Strahan wishes that Higgins would have figured out how to build a time machine in addition to some boats so they could meet up and fuck. Anyway, Higgins' handsome ass and his sexy wife, Angie, now had 3 children, Eddie, Andrew Jr., and Frank. Named all 3 boys after himself and his bros, it seems. And the family moved into a house on Eleanor Street in New Orleans. Also in 1916, Higgins purchased a large tract of timber in the St. Catherine Creek area near Natchez, Mississippi. Got the rights to harvest the timber for a bargain because the area was covered by shallow water, making it very difficult to move out the logs. So difficult, a lot of people thought it was basically impossible. Existing boats that could travel in the shallow water just weren't powerful enough to haul the logs out. And powerful boats that could easily move the logs couldn't travel in that shallow water. To fix this problem, Higgins just built his own custom tunnel stern boat. Easy peasy. As you do. When you're having a problem in the water, you're just like, I should probably fucking build my own boat. That's what I need. I just need to build my own boat. He built a boat modeled after boats commonly used in the shallow waterways of Holland. His boat featured a recessed screw and a semi-tunnel along the bottom of the boat. The propeller was recessed inside of that tunnel, and the tunnel rose up into the hull. To picture this, picture the hump in the floorboard of a car. With this design, the propeller just barely dips below the boat's wheel at the bottom of its hull, drops just low enough to actually be in the water, and this allows you to have a boat that can push itself along in 1-2 feet of water, as opposed to at least 4 or 5 or more feet of water. Higgins' new boat could navigate in very shallow water, and water filled with debris, and the propeller would not get clogged. But he noted that it required twice the power because air got sucked into the semi-tunnel, and the propeller couldn't spin in aerated water. It would just turn froth instead of solid water. Higgins was so annoyed by that problem that he signed up for a correspondence course in naval architecture. Love that. The head of the company, right? Not afraid to go back to school. Higgins now began building these tunnel boats for himself and others in the lumber industry. And he was so damn good at it that gradually boat building became his main business rather than lumber. Higgins and his partners now used their profits to invest in new ventures. In 1920, they founded the Edith Company, a shipping firm ran by a single schooner, the Edith. Edith imported logs and transported finished goods. Higgins used the Edith Company as a way to expand operations, reduce costs, and increase profits. He also hired an unnamed Old Sea Dog. That's how it's written in his biography. Old Sea Dog, a World War I ship captain, to sail Edith. This captain was apparently legendary because he had sank 2 German ships before his own ship sank in a big firefight at sea in World War I, and then while clinging to the wreckage of his ship, a shark bit one of his legs off, and he didn't let go. He survived. This cartoon character of a sea captain was a wild card. He was known for doing stuff like purposefully flooding his own ship's hold, then putting the ship into port for repairs. Then he would make deals with the local ship chandler to re-outfit the entire vessel for a kickback. His past employers knew he was doing that, apparently, but they couldn't do a lot about it because according to maritime law, or at least law at the time, if a captain got fired after a disaster, the boat owner was directly admitting that the captain was incompetent, and that limited the underwriter's liability to evaluate the worth of the ship, excluding cargo, and prevented owners from sinking ships and falsely claiming millions in lost cargo. So he's just running a big insurance scam.
Aye, matey. Captain One-Legged Willie ain't afeard of shark nor German, so he surely ain't afeard of no insurance man.
An informant warned Higgins that this wily one-legged captain was going to scam him on the way to the East Coast with his new boat. So Higgins wired Charleston newspapers, where the guy was going to go into port, told them he would not accept responsibility for any debts contracted by his ship while in port. Then he left to go to South Carolina himself, take his ship back, but by the time he arrived, the ship had already departed. This guy was off to run a scam, and the old Sea Dog captain sailed straight into a fucking hurricane. 1920 storm devastated the East Coast, and the Edith was lost at sea. The captain, of course, was fine. He quickly tamed a whale, rowed it toward shore, stared a manta ray into submission, forced it to haul him directly onto the shore without even getting his boots wet.
Aye, matey. Captain One-Legged Willie ain't afeard of no hurricane. One-Legged Willie can take his hat off in the eye of the storm, not even see his luscious head of hair tousled. I just yell at me own locks, hold, boys, hold! You don't change shape for anyone or anything but me.
No, I think he died. Higgins' previous statement to the paper gave the insurance company grounds to deny all claims against the Edith's lost cargo, too. So that's not good. Higgins received $14,000 for his ship, but that was not nearly enough to pay for all of his clients' lost cargo claims. A.J. Higgins Lumber and Export Company, as creditor of the shipping company, had to absorb the debt. Fortunately, Higgins had the money now to cover a loss like that, and he didn't let that loss keep him from expanding. A.J. Higgins Lumber was only licensed as a wholesaler at the time, which limited their business ventures. So now Higgins and his business partner, Katie, they create the D.V. Johnson Company with a man named, you're never going to guess. Oh, that's right, D.V. Johnson. So they could sell directly to contractors. Johnson became the front man, so retailers would not object when Higgins and Katie broke trade customs and got involved in both the wholesaling and the retailing. They each invested $10,000 into the new company, as did D.V. Johnson, and it was successful. They also invested in gravel pits, sold crushed rock for road building. Katie then asked Higgins to help him save his Katie Gravel Company a bit later. Man, so many companies. Katie's gravel didn't meet the specifications required by railroad and road contractors. So Higgins told him he should install a hydraulic plant to crush it down to the grain required. Katie lacked the $64,000 he needed to purchase and install equipment to build said plant. So now Higgins and Johnson, through D.V. Johnson, they loan him that money and dangerously overextend themselves. Katie promised he would use his influence with the president of the Missouri Pacific Railroad to secure a big contract for both companies, provide gravel for the railroad's track beds. Higgins loans him the $64,000. Katie constructs the plant. Now another business is profitable. But then Katie decides to sell this new business to a minority partner, and also, for reasons never explained, maybe he's just an asshole, refuses to pay the $64,000 he owed Higgins and his partner like an asshole. Katie's refusal to repay the loan and some other losses forced now D.V. Johnson to have to liquidate. Then D.V. Johnson can't pay A.J. Higgins Lumber and Export $100,000 that company owed for equipment and operating expenses. So this terrible domino effect just fucks Higgins' world up big time. And in October of 1923, A.J. Higgins Lumber and Export is forced into liquidation, and Higgins nearly loses everything. But he, of course, does not wallow in despair. He keeps grinding. He uses what resources he still had to found a new company, Higgins Lumber and Export Company, one without any business partners that could end up stabbing him in the back. He hopes he can still turn a profit in the industry based on his reputation, and he can. Higgins is able to amass a small fleet of schooners and brigantines over the next few years to carry his lumber. Also builds himself a new repair yard on the Industrial Canal, a strip of water that connects New Orleans Lake Pontchartrain and the Mississippi River. Or Pontchartrain. Higgins moved his office into the Audubon building on Canal Street, and from 1923 to 1929, he continues building barges and push boats and steadily rebuilds his wealth. Then when the mahogany market goes into decline, Higgins turns his very large supply of mahogany into more barges. Adapting with the times, he is able to sell some of these barges, but not as many as he wants, so he decides to cut the logs down smaller, build some smaller boats, and he hires naval architect George Hewitt to help him do so. Hewitt was tasked with making a pleasure boat out of mahogany, and he creates the Seabird, a narrow 15-foot craft. Then as timber supplies in the South deplete further and an economic depression affects freight rates, Higgins realizes he needs to double down on the small boats. In his Louisiana charter, he had listed his company's primary purpose as manufacturing various types of motorboats. But now, 1926, lumber importing secondary to boat manufacturing. He's constantly reading the landscape, adapting as necessary, which all looks so easy in retrospect when it works out. But like in real time, this guy had to just keep gambling and maneuvering every few years, taking big chances, hitting big pitfalls, getting fucked over by this guy or that guy, having to rebuild. Never knew, really, if his gambles were going to pay off. Dude had a big set of balls. Then in 1927, Louisiana experiences a bunch of flooding, and where others see despair, Higgins sees opportunity. He uses the flooding to test out some new shallow draft boats he'd been working on by extracting equipment on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. He was able to transport tractors and other pieces of large farm equipment on a ramped platform stretched between two of his boats, which would prove invaluable in the development of his LCVPs later in his life. Pulling this off led to his first run-in with the U.S. military as well. In 1928, a Dutch shipping syndicate offered Higgins a contract. They needed 20 boats for the Nut Growers Association. Gotta get those nuts down in the tropics. So much nuts. Oh, sweaty, humid nuts down in the tropics. They got to be harvested. And with this contract, Higgins was now officially a commercial boat builder. He's making that nut dough. Instead of mass assembly, Higgins chose to construct the boats individually so he could improve each craft from one to the next. He ended up creating a boat that could reach 12.8 miles per hour, which might sound like nothing, but it was unheard of for a tunnel boat at the time. That same year, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, hearing about what he had done for those Dutch nuts, they awarded Higgins a contract to build several similar craft for them so he could get on them nuts as well. I don't think he was working with nuts with the Army. He'd have to transport these new boats up the Arkansas River to deliver them, though. And the river levels were high, the water was full of debris, and when they made the first attempt, the bow constantly was hitting objects in the river. Edmund, Eddie, Higgins' oldest son, remarked that they needed a new bow that could ride directly over the logs. And Higgins immediately shot and killed his son for daring to suggest fucking anything to him. If there's a problem, he already knew about it, okay? If anything needed fixing, he'd fix it. Everyone else just need to shut the fuck up. Let him focus on those Dutch nuts and that Army river money. No. Higgins recalled a film he had seen about blue whales when his son brought that up. Together, he and George Hewitt now experimented with a bow design that was shaped a lot like a whale's belly. Their first experiment increased the boat's speed by 10%, which was enough of an increase that when paired with this new hull design that had a different curve to it, it allowed the boats to kind of motor up and over bigger floating logs. Higgins and Hewitt constructed a 16-foot boat named Ann Howe III with their new design. Higgins wanted to challenge the record of a 90-hour trip between New Orleans and St. Louis to get the boats in press. That record had been set by a steamboat called the Robert E. Lee in her race with the original steamboat Natchez. Not the steamboat Natchez currently docked in New Orleans that you can ride as a tourist if you're curious, which I've done a few times now. It's pretty cool. And this record had held for more than 50 years. But then in 1930, the Ann Howe III broke the Louisiana to St. Louis record by making the journey in 87 hours. So Higgins back on top, baby. Fuck his old business partner, William Cady. Fucking riding his nuts. By 1930, Higgins was selling boats like Café Du Monde sells beignets, selling lots of delicious boats to lots of happy people, or something like that. He was selling boats to lumbermen, fur farmers. That's a thing back then. Fur farmer, that was a term. That's a weird term. What do? I farm fur. Bootleggers, the Coast Guard, and oil companies operate in the bayous of the Louisiana Gulf Coast. And during the tail end of the Prohibition era, I love this, Higgins sold boats to both the Coast Guard and to bootleggers. He would sell boats to the Coast Guard to chase bootleggers and sell boats to the bootleggers to get away from the Coast Guard. And there was a rumor that initially he sold faster boats to the bootleggers. And then when the Coast Guard complained they couldn't catch the bootleggers, he sold them a little bit faster boats still. And then he would go back to the bootleggers and like, oh, goddamn, these fucking Coast Guard keeps catching me. Oh, he would sell them a little bit faster boat, and he just kept playing them off each other. Nobody knows if this is 100% true or not, but I hope it is, because that's genius and hilarious. Just, what? You couldn't catch those bootleggers? Oh, must have a new fancy old speedboat, don't you worry. I got just a thing. And it sells them a slightly faster boat. Cut the next week. What? Police almost caught you a faster boat, huh? Oh, hey, must have had a new fancy old speedboat, don't you worry, I got just a thing. Just sells them a slightly faster boat. True or not, I don't know what accent that was, by the way. True or not, Higgins' work with the Coast Guard got the attention of the Marines, and then the Marines urged the Navy to consider using Higgins' boats, but they wanted to use their own designs they were working on instead that sucked. More on that later. On September 26, 1930, now 44-year-old Andrew Higgins, he informally incorporates his new company, calls it Higgins Industries. The purpose of his company is the manufacture and sale of various boats. His primary clients are trappers, oilmen, and lumbermen. He also changes locations. He puts a showroom out front, a warehouse in the back. Kid who built a boat in his mom's basement when he was 12 years old was doing what he was clearly destined to do. 1931, Higgins' 23-foot motorboat, the Dixie Greyhound, breaks the record again for making the 1,150-mile trip from New Orleans to St. Louis. Does it in 72 hours and 4 minutes this time. And making this even cooler, his son Eddie piloted the boat. But then the Great Depression catches up with him. July 11th, 1931, Higgins' company goes into receivership, a court-appointed process that can help creditors recover funds from a company that cannot make loan payments, a company that is going bankrupt and closing. This, again, happens due to the Depression. However, a friendly judge, who clearly was a big fan of Higgins, names Higgins as the receiver of his own company, which is wildly unorthodox, and that saves Higgins from a bankruptcy. So he dodges a bullet. But he still has another problem. He's not able to borrow any money. But he needs more money to keep operating. Also, while his clients still need boats and want to buy more of his boats, they don't have any money to buy them. Depression's fucking everybody over. So what does Higgins do? Well, he gets real creative with his accounting. He creates yet another company, the Boat Services Company, and he starts buying his boats from himself and then renting these boats or leasing these boats to clients who can't afford to buy them but can't afford to rent them or lease them. And that allows Higgins to maintain total control of his company, also to raise capital he needs to stay afloat. Very smart. Technically, his son Frank will manage the BSC, but Higgins was really the one in charge. Through saving a lot of money that would have went to taxes and able to make money by doing what he did, Higgins is able to keep 50 skilled craftsmen on his payroll. They will develop an exceptionally strong loyalty to him that will be beneficial later. With the BSC, Higgins had the money to continue designing shallow craft boats now. As both of his businesses somehow grow during the Depression, Higgins is able to hire more skilled workers like skippers and engineers. He makes an offer to the graduates of nearby Delgado Trade School in New Orleans, which is now a community college. He said the Delgado graduates are excellently qualified craftsmen. They know tools and what to do with them. We can't use ordinary hammer and saw carpenters, but we can use Delgado men. His son Ed Higgins became the chief mechanic, his son Andrew Jr., office manager, and his son Frank is the head of the BSC still. Higgins' fourth son Ronald is still 16 years old, focusing on school. And Higgins' two youngest children, daughters, Andre and Dawn, not involved in the company at all. Dawn just still a toddler. Around this time, Higgins creates the Wonder Boat, another new boat, the predecessor of the Eureka. The Eureka is the boat that will lead to his involvement in World War II. Higgins specifically advertised the Wonder Boat as the homeliest but most efficient boat ever built. Love the honesty. Yeah, it's fucking ugly, but it'll kick the shit out of any boat you got. It featured a rounded bow built from a solid block of pine, which acted as a hefty bumper. Higgins called this bow a headlog. Only thing Higgins didn't like about the Wonder Boat was that it was slow. In 1936, Higgins creates a design principle that makes his tunnel stern boat a lot faster than any other similar boat on Earth. Higgins' foreman made a mistake during construction, one of those fortuitous mistakes. Two metal plates were pulled out of the molding floor and they distorted the shape of the Wonder Boat's hull, formed a V midship and a reverse curve aft. And I totally know what exactly that is. Yeah. Anyway, despite the midship curve aft stuff. Higgins stops, orders the completion of the boat. This happy accident solved Higgins' problem with the Wonder Boat. It could now move through shallow, debris-filled waters quickly, turn quickly. It could travel at speeds greater than 20 miles per hour. And he named this new boat, based on that beautiful mistake, the Eureka. This new boat utilized its reverse curve on the bottom aft, whatever, those terms. And I'm not going to go into more details because I doubt we have a shit ton of boat engineers listening. I'm not going to go over all the specs. Just know that this boat was twice as fast. That any object thrown in front of the boat would get pushed away instead of getting pulled in the propeller. That the boat could plow through light vegetation at full speed, no problem. And Higgins' new boat was now just as fast as regular boats, could operate in very shallow water, could jump over little spits, sandbars, and logs, could rush up directly onto a beach, back up, turn around quickly. It's like a fucking four-wheeler, but a boat. This super swamp boat, massive leap forward in shallow boating technology. Higgins began selling his Eureka boats now all over the country and abroad. In 1937, he won contracts with Lago Petroleum, Standard Oil of Venezuela, Shell Union Oil and Texas Corporation, Republic of Colombia, Peru, Mexico, the Netherlands, East Indies, South America. He's fucking killing it. December 24th, 1937, Higgins Industries files a patent for a whale hull design in the Eureka boat, which is granted on January 17th, 1939. So now no shady competitors can take his special design away from him. Higgins' Eureka boat is the foundation for his contributions to World War II. The Eureka could operate in just 18 inches of water. That's insane. And its so-called headlog, a solid pine at the bow, allowed it to run full speed over all kinds of obstacles. By the late 1930s, Higgins' small shipyard in New Orleans kicking some serious ass. His shallow craft boats are becoming increasingly popular with loggers, oil drillers, the Department of the Interior, the Coast Guard, the Biological Survey. Higgins' reputation as a master boat builder keeps spreading. His boats are in higher and higher demand. The Army Corps of Engineers, Biological Survey Agency began to regularly purchase his boats. And who the fuck is the Biological Survey Agency? I was wondering the same thing. That's a great question. They were an agency made up of biologists who constantly surveyed agents. This agency was established in 1885 as the Office of Economic Ornithology in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Its original purpose was to study how birds affected farm production. Very specific purpose. Over time, the agency's responsibilities expanded to include studying the distribution of animals and birds, tracking their migratory habits, and enforcing wildlife laws. In 1939, the agency was moved to the U.S. Department of the Interior, the DOI, and then merged with the Bureau of Fisheries in 1940 to become the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And this biological survey asked Higgins for a boat that could go up to 20 miles per hour in 9 inches of water. And he told him, "What do you think I am, a magician?" And then he built that boat. And now some of his new boats could operate in ankle-deep water and dense vegetation, which is crazy. And soon Higgins would build boats that could hover like hovercrafts, create, enter, and exit wormholes, time travel, be piloted by Sasquatches who are also dark wizards.
Ding. Yippee!
No. But Higgins did think that his boats could eventually make docks and harbor terminals obsolete because you could basically just drive them right up onto any shore. He also wanted to design giant boats that could do everything his smaller boats could do, as far as shallow water, water full of debris, giant boats that could also pick up and transport huge loads of cargo, completely eliminating the need for traditional docks. However, he decided to put that dream on hold to continue promoting his smaller boats overseas. What he wanted to do before the war sidetracked him is he wanted to advertise his boats in Asia and South America for river passenger and freight services, which could save countries millions in road construction, bridge building, railroad building. He already had contacts in Asia because of his lumber business, and they seemed very interested in his ideas. But then, of course, World War II changed everything. Before we get to the World War II, let's back up, or the years leading up to it. While Higgins' business in creating boats that excelled in operating in shallow water was growing, Higgins was also mired in a years-long battle with the U.S. Navy. He had wanted to sell his products to the Navy for a long time, but for years, they just wanted nothing to do with him. Back in 1928, Higgins had his first contact with the Navy Bureau of Construction and Repair, a.k.a. the BCR, not interested in his boats at all. He approached them again in 1934 with some new designs, still zero interest. Meanwhile, the Marine Corps did want his boats, but they had strict budget constraints at the time, no funds, so they couldn't purchase his landing boats. Biographer Jerry Strahan wrote about the beginnings of his relationship with both the Navy and the Marine Corps, saying, Higgins was an outspoken, rough-cut, hot-tempered Irish man with an incredible imagination and the ability to turn wild ideas into reality. He hated bureaucratic red tape, loved bourbon, and was the sort who tended to knock down anything that got in his way. To the Navy's Bureau of Ships, which favored the big eastern seaboard shipyards, Higgins was an arrogant, small boat builder from the South, a thorn in its side. To the Marine Corps, which desperately needed an effective amphibious assault craft, he was a savior. During the 1940s, Higgins was almost legendary, larger than life. He was a small Southern businessman who became head of one of the largest industrial complexes in the United States. He took on the Washington bureaucracy, labor rackets, the large New England shipyards, and organized labor, never retreating from his principles or avoiding a fight. But before the 1940s, Higgins was an unknown. In 1935, the Navy BCR, who were working on their own version of a shallow draft boat, called for bids. Higgins was unaware of this open competition until October 1st, 1936. By the time he finds out, the competition is going to be over in 5 days. It only lasted until October 6th, 1936. Higgins wrote to the BCR, "We know that we have designed, perfected, and are building the very type of boat best fitted for this purpose." He requested they send a rep to see his boat demonstration, and they just flat out were like, no. They believed that none of the boats he had built can perform landing operations the way the Navy needed them to be done. So again, he misses out with the Navy. Then in January of 1937, the BCR and Navy Bureau of Engineering issued a directive to the Philadelphia Naval Yard to design and construct a landing boat. The Secretary of the Navy created the Navy Department's continuing board for the development of landing boats for training and landing operations. It's a lot of fucking words. They shortened the acronym down to LBB. They worked with the Fleet Development Board to develop and test landing craft, and they had a $1,254,000 budget. But after months of work, all that money, they still didn't have a boat that could actually complete a successful amphibious mission. Then on April 14th, 1937, the LBB met and discussed boat options, including Higgins' 33-foot Eureka, but they rejected the Eureka and all his other boats for being too heavy. But then a few weeks later, in May, Al Hansen, a naval architect with the U.S. Coast Guard, visits New Orleans to test the Eureka. He forwards his test results of a 31-foot Higgins boat to the chief engineer of the BCR, and on July 22nd, 1937, the LBB meets again and decides they will not interfere with their existing projects in their own Philadelphia shipyards. So they're just still not interested. But then a few months later, August of 1937, the LBB does test their Philadelphia shallow watercraft, and it fails miserably. Fails in visibility and in steering. Now, after nearly 4 years of pestering the Navy, Lieutenant Commander R.S. McDowell, responsible for landing craft development in the Bureau of Construction and Repair, contacts Higgins, informs him that the Navy is willing to give him a whopping $5,200 to purchase a 30-foot landing craft from him. So they just have like a little bit less now than the $1.25 million plus they spent earlier to test their own design. They were willing to put $1.25 million in their own design. They're willing to try his design for $5,200. Higgins accepts, though. It could obviously lead to more. May 5th, 1938, Higgins finally gets his first contract with the U.S. Navy. Tiny one that'll lose him a lot of money, but a contract nonetheless. He didn't want to build the Navy a 30-foot boat. He believed a bigger boat would perform way better for what they wanted. He also didn't think he could build that boat for anywhere close to $5,200, but this was the big opportunity he had been chasing for years, and he was eager to prove himself, so he finished a new boat by late May, shipped it to Norfolk, Virginia. Higgins paid all the shipping fees himself, also sent a retired captain on his dime to demonstrate. Not the fucking one-legged guy, but that would have been awesome if he suddenly showed back up. I am back, matey. I just got tamed a shark to get here. Higgins ended up spending over $12,500 to build the boat he sold for $5,200. And then he had to pay, quote, an exorbitant charge to the Navy Yard at Norfolk to use their crane to unload it. That's fucked up. To pay them for them to just receive the boat that they had bought from him. Yeah, this is a huge financial risk considering Higgins' company only made $241.42 in 1937. It was his leanest year, thanks to the Great Depression. He was also now deeply in debt due to the Great Depression. So he spent money he did not have on this new boat design. Big gamble again. But if he wouldn't have taken this gamble, his business almost certainly would have went belly up and we'd have never been talking about him today. Classic big risk, big reward moment. On May 27, 1938, Higgins received word from his captain that he had arrived with a prototype to the Naval Yard, and he performed the test and described the trials as very spectacular and a sensation. The Navy was very impressed, but there was a but. They noted 4 issues with the boat's design. The boat took heavy spray over the stern in rough seas, which they didn't like. It impaired the coxswain's vision. The controls were in the aft section, which they didn't prefer. They felt the stern should be redesigned to part the waves when the craft was beached or retracting. And they wanted the boat to be made of metal rather than wood to reduce costs for mass production and be more fortified from gunfire. So now Higgins gets another naval contract. And I don't have numbers for this one, but it seems like it puts some money in his pocket. June 21st, 1938, the LBB recommends that Higgins gets a contract for 4 30-foot boats, 2 wood and 2 metal, so they can really kind of test them out. Higgins said, I got some experimental orders again for the goddamn 30-foot length boat. I built these more or less under protest. Higgins demanded during a conference that the boats increase to 39 or 40 feet. The Navy argued that some of their transport vessels already had davits for a 30-foot boat, and they wanted to standardize to that length. A davit is a crane-like device used singularly or in pairs for supporting, raising, lowering boats, anchors, and cargo over a hatchway or the side of a ship. So like, when they're lowering these boats down into the water for them to head over to the beach, they gotta use these davits. Higgins said, to hell with designing a boat to fit the davits. They should design their davits to fit a proper boat. After this confrontation, Higgins said the BCR treated him like a, quote, bad boy. How bad? I don't know. Did they treat him like a hot, hard father daddy bad boy? Just dripping in engine oil and boat wax? Getting his naughty bad boy bottom spanked with a paddle? I don't know, maybe. Sources, again, they don't say exactly what kind of bad boy he was. On December 1st, 1938, the Navy did end up purchasing 4 landing boats from Higgins, 2 wood, 2 metal, so we got those 4. And now let's deviate for a few moments to go over what kind of boss Higgins was while all this is going on. Most of the information we have on Higgins, his life and personality, comes from Jerry Strahan's biography, and also an August 16th, 1942 article in Life magazine titled Mr. Higgins and His Wonderful Boats, written by Gilbert Burke. Outside his shipyard, he posted a sign that read, anybody caught stealing tools out of this yard won't get fired. They'll go to the hospital. I love that. He wasn't kidding. Steal from me, and you're going to get your ass beat. He was not opposed to beating some ass. I have a fun 5th takeaway coming up at the end of the episode regarding this. Another sign said, the guy who relaxes is helping the Axis. All right, is in the Axis powers. Higgins was quirky. He drank Old Taylor bourbon frequently in his office. Kept several bottles always stocked up. He was known for saying, I only drink while I'm working. Spoken like a true functional alcoholic. His brashness didn't make him a lot of friends outside of his employees. Higgins was often dismissed by the upper crust of New Orleans as a, quote, crude, hard-drinking outsider, lacking Old South manners and French Quarter charm. Despite his rough, crude demeanor, how dared he not put up pretenses? Higgins ran a highly efficient boat factory. On June 6, 1937, designer and naval architect Al Hansen submitted his report to naval headquarters about a visit to the factory. He wrote that the plant had, quote, an atmosphere of efficiency and cooperation. He was extremely impressed with the class of materials and workmanship. Higgins utilized assembly line boat building, a technique first used by Henry Ford with Eagle boats during World War I. At his city park and industrial canal factories, he used a thermometer or materials control system to ensure delivery of materials before they began to run low. Higgins motivated his employees by telling them things like, it's not enough to give them boats, give them blood. And he also paid them well. Higgins had a loudspeaker system to communicate with employees from his office, had a little mic in his office, which is very funny to me. Just grabbing his microphone from time to time, looking out of his office window. I see you, Larry. I fucking see you dicking around with those bolts, Larry. Come on, dude. Get with it or get the fuck out of the way. For serious matters, he appeared personally. Higgins told Life magazine, the labor bands get up and play a few stirring pieces, including the Star-Spangled Banner, and somebody gets up and makes a speech. When the tears are running down their eyes, then I have the silver-tongued labor leader tell them what's expected of them. I ask them how they're going to do it and so on, and we get along fine. Guy's got bands in the factory somehow. He's playing live music. Okay, all right. Higgins' employees generally loved working for him because he, quote, would take a chance on practically anybody with a plausible idea. He hired, those local tech school grads, nationally known inventors, recent university grads, and, quote, long shots picked up here and there. Higgins got along well with his laborers because, quote, like them, he worked hard, drank hard, and when angry, could swear hard. Oh, fucking blue-collar dude leading blue-collar employees. Fucking hell, Nimrod. Higgins' employees admired him, valued his opinion. The AFL local union was even loyal to him and would defend him against government agencies. If he had a dispute with the union, they allegedly thrashed it out in a soundproof room, worked together. While initially resistant about unions, Higgins eventually defended labor rights. Some of his fellow Southern businessmen would criticize him for attending the Southern Conference for Human Welfare in April of 1941. He made a speech there about his willingness to hire black people equally up to their percentage in the population. The First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, called him one of the most enlightened businessmen. Higgins' critics called him an opportunist for his close relations with the government, to which he responded, "If opportunism consists in not breaking your head against a stone wall, why then he probably is opportunistic. Anybody who has the luck or duty of administering an organization needing capital and employing large numbers of men had better get a new concept of his responsibility. We can't be ruled by the profit motive. There's too much talk about a balanced budget. What we need is a balanced economy. And the day will come when people will be paid to get an education, and that will be a damn good investment." I love that little quote. I love that he wanted his workers to get paid to go to school. Wouldn't that be something? I mean, seriously, wouldn't that be something to have the government truly, literally invest in its people like that? People should be paid to go to school, to perform needed jobs for the economy. Life magazine wrote, "There is an old axiom which urges Americans to live so they can look any man in the face and tell him to go to hell." Higgins not only lives so that he can look any man in the eye and tell him to go to hell, but frequently looks in the eye of a man he doesn't like and calls him a son of a so-and-so. Among the recipients of such compliments have been some of the nation's most prominent businessmen and officers high in the Army, Navy, and Maritime Commission. Yeah, clearly, Higgins not afraid of confrontation, not afraid to speak his mind. Also not afraid to brag about his accomplishments. President Roosevelt once told him, "You're the only man I've ever met who has done all the talking." Life magazine reported he has an immense stock of stories, ranging from somewhat above to far below the borderline, which he retails at great length and with enormous relish, smacking his lips and rubbing his hands as he deftly and tenderly taps in detail after detail. His profanity, which when called into play flows as naturally as water from a spring, is famous for its opulence and volume. I fucking love this guy. His profanity flows as naturally as water from a spring. I gotta say, I have a hard time trusting most people who don't swear. I feel like they're hiding something, like they're putting on airs, right? They're overly worried about social judgment. I don't know, like they're just not being authentic. I mean, you don't have to swear all the time, of course, but never? Makes me feel like I'm walking on eggshells around them. I could offend their delicate sensibilities at any moment. That's not fun. Higgins was a domineering businessman, would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. He told Life magazine, "I operate in a big way and don't give a damn about money." I doubt he truly didn't give a damn about money, but it didn't seem to be his primary motivator. Higgins hated wasting time. When he had an idea, he acted on it quickly and had very little patience for those who got in his way. According to his biography, his own taste runs to researching things quickly, taking all possible shortcuts and thinking about them afterward. When he wants developments in a hurry, he calls a group into his office, fires questions at them, taunts them with their stupidity, pushes them into arguments, swears at them paternally, and gradually gets them functioning at 200 miles an hour. Dude was all about TCB and LFG. Taking care of business, and let's fucking go! Speaking of business, I have been thinking about our old 1-800-business sponsor all week, thanks to a lot of news about the Menendez brothers recently getting out of prison, possibly in a few weeks. Let's talk about a real businessman now. Higgins' money man during the height of his career was Morris Gottsman. When Higgins had an idea, he wanted to get it done no matter the expenses. Gottsman's main job was to keep him from going bankrupt. George Hewitt, naval architect, was the head of the engineering department and helped Higgins' ideas come to life. Also had to frequently tell Higgins that his ideas were literally impossible. Higgins, I guess, would frequently shout at Hewitt, "God damn it, George, I can't live with you, but I can't live without you." Okay, now that we know a bit more about how Andrew worked, a little bit more about his personality, let's get back into his timeline as it ramps up towards World War II. In January of 1939, 2 years before the U.S. would enter the Second World War, the Navy took 18 of Higgins' new landing boats to the Caribbean to run fleet exercises, and testing went well, real well. The next month, on February 19th, 1939, the LBB indicated a preference for Higgins' boats due to their stability, maneuverability, dryness, and ease of retraction. The LBB proposed building one Higgins boat and one Bureau boat, so the Navy would build that one themselves, with the suggested modifications. But then on April 5th, 1939, the BCR awarded the contract to the Navy's own Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. And he keeps getting so close, still struggling to build traction with the Navy. A few months later, in June of 1939, the BCR gives contracts to Higgins and Welland-Davitt, another boat maker who had been in competition with the Navy. They were each to build one boat per LBB specifications. Higgins also wanted to build PT boats for the Navy. They've been looking at bids since the spring of 1939. Higgins thought his experience with building fast boats during Prohibition would benefit him, but he had a lot of difficulty getting an invitation to bid and the specifications for the boats. But once he finally did, he got an offer. Higgins submitted his offer, made sure to bid below cost so he could win the contract. He bid at $58,000 per boat, ended up winning 2 contracts. So he's in now. September of 1939, World War II begins in Europe. Higgins still dreaming of his projects in Asia, but he now devotes most of his time and resources to the impending war. He anticipates that the U.S. government is going to need his boats for the war, that they will work with him, so he takes another big gamble. Another common trait of successful people, betting on themselves. He began building boat factories before he got any big orders. He was criticized for his audacity, for, quote, forcing his products on the Navy, according to competitors, but it worked out for him. U.S. forces were interested in a landing vessel similar to his Eureka that could land in shallow waters and attack beaches. They wanted to avoid going on shore at heavily defended ports. The Marines in particular wanted the Higgins boat, but the only way they could afford them was through the Navy, and the Navy still lukewarm on Higgins. He must have pissed off some top brass over the years over there. In March of 1940, Higgins began studying the Navy's boat designs and offered design improvement suggestions. He was, quote, dumbfounded and appalled when the BCR rejected his suggestions and denounced him for making them. He had definitely pissed him off now, but he won't give up on doing more business with him. In April of 1940, Higgins completed and tested his new PT-6, one of his contracted boats. He smugly noted, the objectionable characteristics and performance we had prophesied were proven in the test. The Navy suggested an approved design did not pass acceptance trials. Higgins chose to absorb repair costs, rebuild a boat named PT-6 Prime, but again, he's forced to go with Navy specifications he doesn't want. While he's doing that, Higgins, not able to depend on the Navy, secures boat contracts with the nations of Finland and England for $553,000 and $750,000 respectively. And on July 8th, 1940, Higgins begins pushing his Eureka landing boat on the British now, and he wants them to consider a 36 or 40-foot model. In a letter to Witt and Chambers Limited of London, he wrote, we would like to have you lose interest and do not recommend the U.S. Navy 30-footer, even though it is our design and our own development. We do not like the boat for the reason that the length is too short to the beam. He suggested the boats could be used for reconnaissance missions, raiding parties, and patrol boats. He then promised the British their boats would be ready for delivery very quick on July 22nd. And he was able to deliver quickly because he gave them boats he had already built for Finland. And then he told Finland their boats are going to be late due to some unforeseen delays. He's a crafty guy. Higgins also used the money Finland gave him to build a new factory. He would deliver Finland their boats just 40 days late. Then he focused on the U.S. military again. He was sure the U.S. was going to enter the war, predicted increased demand for his Eureka and PT boats. He purchased the Albert Weeblin Marble and Granite Works on City Park Avenue, New Orleans, turned it into a boat factory worth $1.5 million. That was now one of the largest boat manufacturing plants under one roof in the world. Even with all that expansion, Higgins knew he still didn't have enough room, though. So he decided to build on an unused portion of a cemetery behind a shipyard without asking the people who owned the cemetery if that was okay. Just straight up built part of a shipyard on somebody else's land. I hadn't heard of somebody doing that shit before. Can you imagine if somebody did that to you? They're just building an addition to their house, and they do it, partly on your land. Just, hey, bud, what's going on over here? Oh, I'm expanding my garage. What do you think? Well, I think your garage is in my driveway. Oh, is it? Silly me. Well, I've already set the foundation. Can we just leave it? Can you be just more neighborly, and just give your neighbor some of your shit? Higgins' plant was so large that 40% of his facility was built on property he did not own or rent. That's crazy. No idea how the hell he pulled that shit off, but he did. Just hope that whatever money he was going to make was going to be enough to pay off the lawsuits that were going to come later, I guess. Work began before the official opening on August 24th, 1941. On July 30th, backing up here, 1940, Finland bestowed upon Higgins the title of Finnish consul to New Orleans, even though he had sold boats they bought to England. They didn't find out about that. On August 20th, 1940, the Navy gave Higgins a contract for 62 30-foot landing crafts. Higgins was happy about the big order, but still annoyed about the size. He said, I got so exasperated that on my own and without an order and at my own expense, I built a boat 36 foot of length and bore all the expenses of shipping it to Norfolk, demanding it be tested. I love that he just would not stop fighting for this bigger, better boat because he just knew it was going to be what they wanted. On September 17th, 1940, the Navy now tested a Chris Craft Corporation boat, a Higgins boat, and a metal BCR boat. Once again, he's competing for a contract. Higgins' boat kicks the shit out of the competitors' boats that day and will beat other boats they'll look at later. His boat was, quote, by far the most superior and exceeded in performance any other landing boat that the members of the board had ever seen. But still, because he was annoying to work with, at least to the Navy, on September 23rd, the newly formed Bureau of Ships, which had taken over the BCR and the Bureau of Engineering, gave a contract to build 16 metal BCR boats to the Gibbs Gas Engine Company in Jacksonville, Florida. And that was after their boat was proven to be the least successful of all the boats in the trials. So guessing Gibbs was a lot better than Higgins at kissing ass or maybe at bribing. However, shortly after Gibbs won that contract, Higgins convinced the LBB to recommend the Navy purchase 335 of his 36-foot Higgins boats. Fingers crossed. Secretary of the Navy and Chief of Naval Operations both noted the superiority of Higgins' boats. Higgins was excited to finally prove that his 36-foot boat was better. He built 2 more at his own expense, featuring different hull designs, one with a V-hull, one with a flatter forward section. On October 22nd, 1940, Higgins sent both of his new boats for testing with the Navy at Virginia Beach. The V-bottom had greater speed. The flat bottom retracted easier. Further testing on November 5th showed that the flat bottom boat, while the slower of the 2 models, still easily exceeded the Navy's speed requirements. And now on November 18th, 1940, Higgins, officially, finally, earns a huge naval contract. One for those 335 36-foot Eurekas with the flat hull design. Finally won his battle with the Navy. And not long after that, the sub-board of the Navy's Inspection and Survey Department soon witnessed the trials of one of his 70-foot PT boats that were destined for England. One of these boats, when fully loaded, still able to travel at 40 knots, which is about 46 miles an hour. Higgins charged the British $110,000 per boat. Business booming. By December of 1940, Higgins Industries now has 691 employees. By the end of 1940, Higgins earned over $250,000 and had contracts with the Navy worth more than $3 million, plus over $2 million in private and foreign contracts. Once again, he had battled his way back from serious financial problems. All this growth got the attention of labor unions, though, specifically the American Federation of Labor. The new employees wanted to have an election to bring in the AFL. They were dissatisfied that there was no consistent wage scale working for Higgins. When somebody was hired, he was paid according to his individual placement, and people doing the same job did not always receive the same wage. Higgins fought against bringing in the union, but when he saw that his workers would not back down, he asked his loyal employees to propose forming a company union. They didn't want to do that. The new employees insisted on the AFL. The stalemate then came to an end with a sanction from the U.S. Department of Labor. In November of 1940, all of the Higgins employees met at an old bar near the plant. Must have been a real big bar. After having a vote, the AFL won out. When Higgins heard the results, he, quote, turned red in the face, and then he called everyone together inside of his plant and told them a little story about a cowboy camp in Texas. This is so funny to me. He said that the foreman of this camp couldn't keep a cook because the cowboys tormented him. They complained about the food, they pranked him constantly, and the cook eventually quit when he just couldn't take any more of their bullshit. The foreman was so frustrated with his cowboys for running off the cook that now he made the cowboys draw straws, and whoever got the shortest straw had to become the new cook. And whoever was the first man to complain about this guy's cooking would then become the new cook. Sure enough, someone complained, thought they could do it better, and now this complainer was the new cook, and he found out he hated cooking. And now he did everything he could to try and get somebody else to complain so they would have to be the cook. But no one would. Finally, he made a big old pie out of literal cow shit. A cowboy took a bite, spit it out, and said, "This tastes like shit." The cook thought he had happily lost his job, but then the cowboy added, "But I love it." And he ate some more. Higgins finished telling that story by telling his workers, quote, "And you sons of bitches, that's how I love you." Moral of the story, I think what he was saying there was that he thought them joining the AFL was a bunch of bullshit. But he'd eat their shit if that's what it took to keep them getting their shit done. November 25th, 1940. Higgins entered into agreements with AFL affiliates, tried to establish a good relationship with the union, and he would warm up to the union. Later, when he needed their help, when he needed help in Washington with his naval contracts, he would contact the AFL to pressure them, and they would. Biographer Jerry Strahan wrote, "The industrialist did not like having the union in his plants, but if it had to be there, he was going to make it work for him." Again, he just adapts. From February 4th to 16th, 1941, the Marines and Navy conduct Flex 7, their final military testing exercise before the U.S. enters the war. Higgins' Eureka was successful in maneuvers testing, but there were still some minor defects. The Marines believed that with a few further modifications, the boat would be an answer to the Marine prayer. In April of 1941, Higgins went to the Bureau of Ships office to argue in favor of how he wanted to design tank glider boats for them, boats used to transport tanks and other vehicles to and from ships, between ships and land. He looked at the Navy's blueprints for how they thought Higgins should build them and literally wrote on their boat, "This boat stinks." And he added his initials for emphasis. So actually he wrote, not on the boat, but on the boat's blueprints. Literally wrote, "This boat stinks." The Navy went ahead with their design, and then the boat failed during testing trials. Then they agreed to give Higgins a contract to build a tank glider prototype for them. He must have loved that. Must have loved hearing about how their designs failed when he's like, "I fucking told you. I told you it was shit. You didn't listen." And then they come back and beg him for his design. April 30th, 1941, Higgins wins a 188 boat contract for his tank gliders, which will be called LCMs in the near future, landing craft mechanized. On May 18th, Higgins draftsmen redesigned an already built boat that was like a large kind of barge towboat powered by 2 engines for the LCM prototype. Craft had a ramp at the bow. Week later, May 26, 1941, a representative from the Bureau of Ships and the Marine Equipment Board visited New Orleans to witness testing of the 3 different Eureka models. One of these models will be the future LCVP. Higgins' boat passes the trials. On May 27th, 1941, the LBB met to consider the testing reports. They recommended a special board of Marine Corps and Bureau of Ships representatives to test the Higgins boats again. If the tests were successful, 87 of the 188 boats should be constructed to include ramps, and Higgins will get a contract for 50 tank gliders with expedited delivery. Higgins was informed that the board was coming and instructed to have plans ready for an experimental 45-foot tank glider. Higgins told him that he would have a finished boat instead. He was told that couldn't be done, and he responded, "The hell it can't. You just be here in 3 days." Love it. Higgins also agreed to build the tank glider under the Marine specifications only. He was sick of dealing with Navy bullshit, and since they were desperate for his boats and tank gliders, they agreed to his demands. Higgins and his men got to work right away, constructing and modifying an already constructed towboat. They only stopped working to listen to an occasional presidential radio broadcast. There were problems with the ramps because the controls for the Eureka did not work on the larger craft. Higgins needed a new pulley system, so he gathered Hewitt, other draftsmen, and his son Ed, sat him down on a conference table, and Higgins told him no one was leaving the room until they built a new ramp. He meant it. Higgins sat down, began working on his own business tasks. At lunch, his son Ed tried to leave. His father shouted at him, "Stay in the fucking room until the ramp's done." He had sandwiches delivered for everybody. They could only leave to go to the bathroom if they wanted to keep working for him. One draftsman had previously built a prototype ramp out of a cigar box. The other draftsman had told him his model was too cumbersome, so he put it in his desk, forgot about it. Now he brought it back out during this meeting, and they all worked together to try and fix deficiencies in this model, and by late afternoon, had a solution. They told Higgins. Higgins sent the design to some machinists, and they had it built immediately. Higgins had a new 45-foot tank glider designed, built, and tested in under 61 hours. May 30th, 1941. Now, Higgins gets a conference call with the Marine Corps and the members of the Bureau. They instructed him to develop 50 of his brand new 45-foot tank gliders immediately. First 10 boats would be due in just over 2 weeks, June 15th. Fulfilling this order, not going to be easy. The crafts needed 2 engines each. Higgins didn't have 100 engines. Also didn't have enough steel. So he had his welders save as many scraps as possible and look for more. Also sent a fleet of trucks and armed guards to a barge load of steel in Baton Rouge that he had heard to come in. And he, quote, persuaded the consignee to release the metal to him. And it sounds like he may have threatened the consignee with violence if he didn't get that metal. Higgins also called a Birmingham steelmaker away from a Sunday golf game to persuade him to hand over some of his steel. Then he called the president of Southern Railway to attach some train cars carrying a bunch of steel to some of his passenger cars, which were already en route to New Orleans, to get them to him faster. This was against regulations, but he got permission from the Navy to pressure the railway to do as he asked. Now Higgins had enough steel, but he has a new problem. He didn't have enough room to build all these boats. So he gets permission, thanks to who he was, building the boats for, and is able to close off an entire block of Polymnia Street, which bordered one side of the plant. He set up camp as tent workshops, purchased an old stable a few hundred feet away for further construction. Because the stable was too low for cranes, all the metal had to be carried into the shop. He hired, quote, bull gangs, big groups of strong dudes, to carry the metal by hand into the building. At times, the men would be carrying more than a ton of metal in one trip. All that caused a huge disruption in town. Some residents couldn't drive up to their houses anymore. Some trucks couldn't make deliveries. Garbage men couldn't collect trash, etc. But the Navy issued an emergency order, and people just had to make sacrifices for national security. Higgins now has the steel he needed, room to build his ships. He had figured out how to get his needed engines on time as well. But now he has yet another problem. Didn't have enough bronze for the shafting on the boats. He thought he had some bronze lined up with the Texas oil field owner, but the guy refused to sell it. Higgins doesn't have time to get an official order in from the Navy, so he has his workers go literally steal the bronze from the guy in Texas who would not sell it to him. Literally broke in, stole the guy's shit from a storage facility. According to his biography, with the Texas police in hot pursuit, they crossed the state line back into the friendly jurisdiction of the Louisiana state troopers. The workers then apologized for their mistake and returned a small portion of what had been stolen. God, this dude definitely knew how to get shit done. And clearly a member of the it's better to ask forgiveness than permission camp. On June 15th, 1941, Higgins has 26 boats completed for the Navy. And now they finally accepted his design as the standard for all future boats and tank gliders. Fuck their davits. Right? They moved to his designs now. Higgins then got a $385,000 contract for more than 200 Liberty ships, the largest order ever placed by the Maritime Commission. He promised to get a new batch of ships built every 5 days, even though it typically took 150 days to have these things built. Also planned to make more than 300 ships a year. And he did. By the end of 1941, Higgins was designing landing craft in his warehouse and owned a massive manufacturing plant. Eventually, he will expand during the war to 8 plants throughout New Orleans and employ over 20,000 workers and produce roughly 700 boats a month. And after Pearl Harbor, Higgins became an equal opportunity employer as well. He actually had the first racially integrated workforce in all of New Orleans. Quickly began hiring women, people of all and any ethnicities, the elderly, people with disabilities, whoever could get shit done. And his new employees did get shit done. They actually set production records, and they received equal pay for doing so. December 8th, 1941, the day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Higgins files his first patent for his tank glider. Higgins Industries growing explosively during the war. Higgins was an ideal manufacturer during a crisis. The military needed somebody who could produce boats as fast as possible. So Higgins' managerial issues, his disdain for meetings, planning, and paperwork, that became irrelevant. Aspects of his personality and style that were considered a liability before the war, now a huge asset. No one could produce boats as fast or create prototypes as quickly as Higgins and his team. During the war, Higgins expressed interest in getting into the aircraft industry now. The War Production Board allowed him to build a plywood factory in New Orleans, and the Army awarded him a contract for 1,200 Curtiss C-76 cargo planes. So he founded a new business, Higgins Aircraft Corporation. Dude had all kinds of ideas. Never wanted to put all of his eggs in one basket. He was constantly dreaming and scheming. He planned to sell boats abroad after the war in a joint corporation with China. Also planned to build houses, build furniture. He wanted to manufacture helicopters, build engines for other manufacturers. He wanted to make domestic planes, quote, and almost anything that occurred to him. Dude actually makes me feel a lot better about my brain fucking ping-ponging all over the place. I have pages and pages and pages for plans I don't have time for. If I didn't need sleep and there was just 72 hours in a day, I could get so much done. Damn you, time! Why can't I bend you to my fucking will? 1942 now, the Marine Corps requests an LCPL with the ramp from Higgins. And again, an LCPL is a landing craft personnel large. Too many Marines were getting shot while jumping over the sides of the existing LCPLs. Higgins now combined his first LCPL with his LCM to make his now famous LCBP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel Crafts. This boat would greatly help make D-Day as successful as it was. Higgins had heard from U.S. Marine Lieutenant Victor Krulak about a very effective Japanese landing craft with the bow ramp used during Japan's 1937 invasion of China. So he modified his LCPL to include that feature. His new ship could hold 36 men, a jeep and 12 men, 8,100 pounds of cargo, or a combination of men and cargo. August 7th, 1942 marked the beginning of the U.S. military's Guadalcanal campaign. Guadalcanal, an island in the South Pacific, about 1,100 miles off the northwest coast of Australia. And the new LCPLs, the now famous Higgins boats, made their big debut at Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal was led primarily by the Marines, who would just put in a big order for some Higgins boats. And this would be the very first major land offensive by Allied forces against Japan. The Allies landed on the island the night of August 6th, surprising Japanese forces. They would go on and fight for 6 months and 2 days before the Japanese, after losing almost 20,000 men, fled the island. And without Higgins boats, without a surprise landing, a victory might not have been possible. I mean, just think about how they would have had to get troops on the ground in these islands in the South Pacific or on the beaches of Normandy, without Higgins boats. His fast, shallow water boats were armor-plated. Front of the boat was made out of steel. These things could handle quite a bit of gunfire, still not sink. If not for those boats, what other kinds of boats could unload troops in just a few feet of water? I mean, I guess what, an inflatable raft that one bullet could just rip a hole through and then everybody on board sinks? That's not going to work. Those guys aren't protected at all. So do you just only parachute troops in? That's not going to work either for a large assault, right? They're sitting ducks floating down to the ground. You can't get a whole bunch of troops into a concentrated, heavily fortified area that way. You can't deliver a bunch of, heavy armored tanks alongside them like you could with some of these other boats, like his tank lighters, his LCMs, that Higgins also designed. These boats of his were crucial to the war effort, crucial to putting a lot of troops all over the world, since Allied forces had to consistently travel across the ocean to get to where the Axis powers were. Back to the war effort now. July 9th, 1943, the Allies made airborne and seaborne landings in Sicily with Higgins boats. Because of poor weather, they had the element of surprise on their side. Higgins boats were critical in getting the soldiers to shore. Like with D-Day later, the weather threw things off, but the boats were still able to reach the shore and unload soldiers, jeeps, tanks, and much-needed supplies. In September of 1943, several incredible naval feats took place. The U.S. Fifth Army landed at Salerno, Italy, and General Douglas MacArthur captured Salamaua in New Guinea. I think that's how you say it, Salamaua. At this point, the American Navy totaled 14,072 vessels. Incredibly, of those vessels, 12,964 were designed by Higgins. 93%. 93% of the Navy's boats built in New Orleans by Higgins and his team. Higgins would sell the U.S. military over 23,000 LCVPs, aka Higgins boats, alone before the war was over. Operation Avalanche, the invasion of Salerno, took place December 9th, 1943. September, what I was trying to say. The plan was to invade without any naval or aerial bombardment. They wanted the element of surprise, which was only possible with Higgins' specialized landing crafts. And thanks to over 600 vessels, most of them Higgins boats, by the end of the very first day of fighting, the Fifth Army had pushed between 5 and 7 miles inland. Then a few months later, the U.S. and Japan fought in the Battle of Tarawa on the Tarawa Island in the region of Micronesia, over 2,000 miles south of Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific, from November 20th to the 23rd in 1943. This was the first American defensive in the Central Pacific region and the first major opposition to an amphibious landing encountered by the U.S. The Marines arrived in their Higgins boats for the attack. Initially, most of the Higgins boats got hung up on the reef surrounding Tarawa and faced intense gunfire. However, Higgins LCMs were able to drop their ramps and release 6 tanks onto the beach. And with those tanks wreaking havoc by noon, the Marines had successfully gotten through the first line of Japanese defenses. June 6, 1944 was D-Day. We already went over that in a lot of detail, so I will skip to August 15th, 1944, when the Allies engaged in Operation Dragoon, landing operation in southern France. Day 1, a wave of landing crafts fired rockets to explode Axis landmines to clear the way for the next soldiers. The landing was a huge success with few Allied casualties. Higgins boats helped get over 150,000 troops on shore in the initial landing and over 500,000 military personnel in total. And in just over 4 weeks, the Allies would liberate southern France, taking around 25,000 casualties compared to the Nazis taking almost 160,000 casualties. A few months later, Thanksgiving Day, 1944, the war was looking like it was about to be won in Europe. Things are looking good for the Allies, and Supreme Commander Eisenhower said in his address to the nation, "Let us thank God for Higgins Industries, management, and labor, which has given us the landing boats with which to conduct our campaign." By the end of 1944, Higgins was a household name in America. He had power and influence, and he used that to make political inroads. He offered his support for FDR and Vice President Truman during their last presidential campaign, which was Roosevelt's fourth. So weird to think about. According to biographer Jerry Strahan, Higgins' support was definitely part of what helped Roosevelt win his fourth presidential election. On February 19th, 1945, the U.S. Marine Corps and Navy engaged in the famous Battle of Iwo Jima, which would end with the capture of the island from the Japanese Army. At 8:59 a.m., the first Marines landed on the beach in their Higgins boats. Instead of easy beaches, they found steep slopes made of black volcanic ash. Day one of the battle featured heavy casualties, but the Americans did take the island. March 26, 1945, and Higgins' boats got them safely, well, mostly safely, to the shore. April 1st, 1945, the Marine Corps and the Army fight in the Battle of Okinawa against the Japanese Army. This was the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater of the war. Again, Higgins' boats, used as part of the initial landing, critical to the success of the attack. May 7th, 1945, the German High Command officials signed the unconditional surrender of all German forces at Reims in northeastern France. And then on September 2nd, 1945, Japanese representatives signed their surrender, officially ending World War II. And a month later, Higgins' boat contract with the U.S. government ends, October 11th, 1945. The Navy had anticipated the war to continue through at least October or November. Now that it was over, they canceled all of their outside contracts. And that marked the beginning of a period of decline for Higgins Industries, which, makes sense. No more great big war, no more great big military contracts. At least that's how it used to go. His workers also further unionized and began going on strike. Tough combo, man. Huge drop in income combined with a lot of workers wanting higher wages. And the combo leads, of course, to Higgins selling off some of his plants, laying off thousands of employees. In the post-war period, he and his company returned to making pleasure crafts and commercial boats. However, when fighting begins in Korea just a few years later, in the summer of 1950, Higgins goes back into building boats for the military, and his company's profits ramp back up. Again, they employ more people, but then he dies. At the time of his death in 1952, his company was working on building over $61 million worth of cargo vessels, tugs, minesweepers, bridge-building boats, and other classified boats for the military. Speaking of Higgins' death, on August 1st, 1952, Andrew Jackson Higgins died at the age of 65 in a crazy way, just like his dad and brother. Strangely mirroring his father and brother's deaths during his childhood, Higgins died at night after waking up with the sound of a neighbor's barking dog. He woke up with the intention of going outside and yelling at the dog to shut up, that's assumed, slipped, fell down the stairs, survived the fall relatively unharmed, but when he pulled himself up to his feet at the base of the staircase, found himself face to face with his neighbor's dog, which had somehow gotten into the house, and the dog had a gun, and the dog accidentally shot Higgins in the head. Dog said later it just wanted to scare him. It's fucking crazy, right? Do I need to say that I'm just kidding about that? I hope not. No, he was admitted to the hospital a few days before he died for a checkup. Family reported to the Associated Press he died of a stomach ailment. Other sources said he was being treated for stomach ulcers and had a stroke. That's how he died. His four sons, Edmund, Andrew Jr., Frank, and Roland, all worked together to continue running the family business after their dad's death, but they're not good at it. And they have to sell Higgins Incorporated to a New York shipyard just a few years later. Higgins Industries, for all intents and purposes, dies with Andrew. It officially finally closes down its last bit of business in 1959. And now desperate for money, his sons convinced their mom to publish her very juicy diary, which you've heard some samples of, which did become a New York Times bestseller titled Andrew Higgins, Former Wood Importer, Master Pleasure Exporter. February 14th, 1943. My dear husband is trying to help win 2 wars now. One in Europe against Hitler, and one at home against menopause. I turned 54 in June, and while my supple body is still willing, it's also drier than the space between a camel's toes as it prances across the Sahara most days. And yet my Romeo, sweet Handsy Andy,
56 years young. Still has the iron rod of a teen boy who eats nothing but oysters, reads nothing but hardcore pornography. He worries not about my sweet front butt's lack of carnal juices, reminding me that my saliva or his will provide all the moisture our romance desires. But we won't even need to use that spit now, for he also, in his sexual wisdom, bought me a sex swing for Valentine's Day and a 75-gallon drum of Astro Glide that he had delivered to the side of our bed. He also ordered a set of plastic sheets, and he had a hose installed in our room to wash it off. And he had a full-size wrestling ring built near our walk-in closet. I would write more, but he's currently rolling around on the plastic sheet after taking a virtual shower in the Astro Glide. He's ready, my champion. He's ready to step into the ring. He's wearing a Lucha Libre mask and some boots he had shipped up from Mexico, and nothing else. He's hired a professional ringside announcer to call a match between himself, a.k.a. Rey Mysterio, and my bearded clam, a.k.a. Vagina Rosa del Desierto.
I'm not sure if that was fun for you, but it was pretty fun for me. I have no idea what his sons did. After they lost the company, I doubt they tried to exploit Mama's Vagina Rosa del Desierto. I hope they did. I doubt they did. Despite his incredible story, Higgins' name faded into obscurity soon after his death, and for decades he remained largely unknown until June 6, 2000, when the World War II Museum opened in New Orleans and recognized his life and work by displaying a reproduction of one of his Higgins boats. Additionally, historian, author, professor, Vagina Rosa del Desierto lover. I gotta stop saying that. Douglas Brinkley wrote an article about him in 2000 for American Heritage, coinciding with the museum's opening. Still by 2017, there was only one official biography written about him. Andrew Jackson Higgins and the Boats That Won World War II, written by Jerry Strahan. We quoted him several times, published in 1998. Since then, another book about him was published in 2017, and then a kid's book made in 2020. Author Strahan wrote of Higgins, "Without Higgins' uniquely designed craft, there could not have been a mass landing of troops and material on European shores or the beaches of the Pacific Islands, at least not without a tremendously higher rate of Allied casualties." In May of 2019, Andrew Higgins was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, long overdue. Fewer than 20 original Higgins boats remain today, most of them on display in various museums throughout the country. There's also 2 in France. One, of course, is at the World War II Museum in New Orleans. Lindsay and I visited that museum a few weeks ago. Checked out the Higgins boat. Very cool. Crazy to think about how it was used. Crazier to think about how World War II might have ended if it had never been made.
Good job, soldier. You made it back. Barely.
Before sharing some final thoughts, the FBI has contacted me and informed me that for my safety, for the safety of my family, I should play the following sponsor. Hey, it's Bob. It's Bob. From Bob's Expendable Bonsai Fruit Biz. I did it. I busted out of jail. I stuck a few little bonsai chair trees up my ass. I stuck them into my cell. It hurt. It hurt a lot. It's worth it, though. Do you know, if you eat over 100 tiny cherries in one sitting, you can lose over 30% of your body weight. Less than 12 hours. Lots of tiny cherries equals lots of great big old boobs. I got so skinny I shimmied right out of my cell. I took my little trees with me. Now I'm in the woods. I'm hiding out in the woods. Maybe I'm in a warehouse. I don't know. Maybe I'm right behind you. I can't say. There's so many bloodhounds. There's a lot of helicopters, but they won't keep me from my dreams. You need some little plums. Time for holidays. Everyone knows it's not Thanksgiving without little tiny plums. You need some tiny little apples? Make a little glass of apple cider for Christmas. Get some. Oh, I'm tired. You gotta get some little peaches for Hanukkah. Everyone knows that it's not Hanukkah without little peach flavored dreidels. Hey, what about Ramadan? No, seriously, what is it? What is it?
I don't know about it, but I need to know what little tiny fruits that the Muslims want to eat when they're fasting. You can't eat regular food. You can still eat little berries when you're fasting, can't you? Bob's Banner for bonsai-fruit.biz. Go to it. Bob's Banner for bonsai-fruit. Place for the dogs, give me. God damn it. Oh, I have a whole orchard in my little trailer. I've been dragging around in the woods or a warehouse. Why am I living like this? I should be a billionaire. Bob's Banner for bonsai-fruit.biz. I'm not just going crazy. God damn it. I'm making tiny fruit trees so you can suck my tiny fruit. I see the dogs. So that's Bob. He's still a problem. He's a very big problem. But you know what? Even though he wants to kill me and my family, I do respect his grind. I respect he doesn't have a lot of quit in him. I think Andrew Higgins would respect his grind. You know, Andrew Jackson Higgins. What a life. I hope you liked hearing about it on this Veterans Day episode. To all veterans listening, truly, thank you for your service. To everyone, I hope you were inspired by this story. The guy was a fighter. Started working when he was 9. Never quit, ever. Worked the rest of his life, had a lot of big wins, had a lot of big losses. Employed a lot of people, saved a lot of lives. Helped win a very important war. Died somewhat young at the age of 65, but he squeezed the equivalent of at least, 2 full, impressive careers into his 65 years? Incredible. Let's now head to our takeaways. You are going to love number 5.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Number 1, Andrew Jackson Higgins, born in 1886 in Columbus, Nebraska. Built his first boat when he was just 12 years old in his mom's basement. So big he couldn't get it outside, so he and some friends, they just tore down, rebuilt the basement wall, no big deal, then took it out in the lake and then raced their asses off. Number 2, Higgins was already business savvy at the age of 9 when he got his first job. Cutting grass with a sickle, some folks call it a sickle. Mm-hmm. Quickly hired employees, turned himself into a company manager, did this with grass cutting and newspapers, sold his paper business to an adult when he was 13 for $1,700. Number 3, Higgins' Eureka boat laid the foundation for his future World War II success. The Eureka could travel in very shallow water, navigate in the debris-filled bayous and swamps surrounding New Orleans. Higgins used the Eureka in some way for all his future boat designs, eventually adding a ramp or expanding the size to make the LCVP, the LCM, the tank glider, and many more models. Higgins named his original boat Eureka for his Eureka moment when designing it. Without that serendipitous accident, Higgins may never have designed the boats that won World War II. Number 4, Dwight Eisenhower called Higgins the man who won the war for us. Without Higgins' LCVPs, invasions like Operation Overlord, the Battle of Tarawa, the invasion of Sicily, and so many more amphibious operations wouldn't have been possible. His boats allowed soldiers to land directly on the beaches they wanted to attack and gave them the critical element of surprise they needed to successfully win battles. And number 5, new info. Higgins was scrappy, real scrappy, and definitely not afraid of confrontation. For example, in 1928, when he was 42, he was furious when he discovered some of his new barges were not sealed properly. He confronted a man in the caulking crew, asked who was slacking. The boy told him that a big Irishman wasn't doing his job properly. So Higgins now invited that big Irishman into his office, and then he closed the door. And then shortly after closing his office door, his other employees heard a bunch of commotion inside the office. It sounded like it was pretty violent. One assistant later reported, quote, "After a long while, the door opened. Mr. Higgins stepped out, a little mussed up. 'Send for an ambulance,' he said." I didn't have to be told. Practice makes perfect. I had the ambulance there already. Well, the next day, the Irishman's wife attacked Higgins with her umbrella in retaliation for beating her husband into the hospital. And while I know that's a crazy way to handle a work dispute, an employee problem, don't you sometimes miss the days when somebody just could beat somebody else's ass up for fucking up and not need to get the cops and lawyers involved? I think our very contentious society would be a lot more civil, a lot more civilized today if more people took punches to the face. I took a bunch of punches to the face growing up, and it definitely taught me to have better manners. 10 out of 10, highly recommend an ass whooping as an attitude adjustment.
Timesuck Top 5 Takeaways.
Andrew Higgins, D-Day's secret war hero, has been sucked. Thank you to the Bad Magic Productions team for helping making Timesuck, starting with Queen of Bad Magic birthday girl, Lindsay Cummins. Thanks also to Logan Keith helping to publish this episode, designing merch for the store at badmagicproductions.com. Thank you to Olivia Lee for her initial research, most of which had to be done via a book that you cannot find online. So you got to fucking by hand, write it all over, the important passages and stuff. Thanks to the All Seeing Eyes moderating the Cult of the Curious private Facebook page, Mod Squad making sure Discord keeps running smooth, and everyone over on the Timesuck subreddit and Bad Magic subreddits. And now, time for this week's, I think, kind of special updates.
Updates? Get your time sucker updates.
We got some more serious, thought-provoking updates than we usually get this week, and I liked it. First one I will share comes from sharp, empathetic sack Brandon Wilson, who wrote in with a subject line of Sedition Act. Dan the man, love the show, 6 out of 5 stars. I want to keep this short so I won't be gargling your balls, as is custom for every email. Hopefully my sacrifices in the past will cover this one. You mentioned how people during the times of COVID and since have claimed that there is some controlling agenda and other types of crazy claims made that make it seem like there was some new overreach on behalf of the government. I agree wholeheartedly with what you said. Those fears were blown out of proportion and people over-exaggerated, but I did not agree with one thing you said. You said, and I'm paraphrasing, the regulations put out during COVID were nothing compared to the Sedition Act of 1918, and we need to stop acting like it was. While, yes, your sentiments were true and accurate, just because it's not as bad as it has been or could be, that's not a reason to ignore it. We are not subjects of the government. And anytime the government oversteps its bounds in an attempt to control or limit activities of our population, we need to be vocal about it. And we also need to step up for our fellow man. Say you're a right-wing, straight white Christian man, and it is illegal to be transgender. Maybe you don't care, doesn't affect you. Why should you? Well, I'll tell you why. Because your brothers and sisters are having their freedom stifled by a government that has no right to do that. That's wrong. And it's your obligation to stand up for your fellow American and prevent those things from happening. I'm reminded of 2 quotes. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I'm not a socialist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I'm not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. By Martin Niemöller. That pastor. And those who would give up essential liberty to purchase temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Quote by Benjamin Franklin. Those quotes might sound extreme, but if we give an inch of freedom up because it could be worse, then eventually we'll have none. I guess keeping my emails short didn't work out, so gargle I shall. Love the show. I've listened to every episode. Is We Done was amazing. Scared to death, fucked me up so bad I had to stop listening. Bad magic fucks. Keep it up. Love you, Brandon. Well, Brandon, I love your email. And I've actually shared that quote by Niemöller in at least one past episode, if not 2. I love that quote. It was not my intention to be dismissive of the rights of others with the COVID regulation comment. I don't know that COVID regulations are the best example of when to make the argument about standing up for the rights of others by not being in favor of vaccine mandates. I totally get the transgender comparison you make, agree there. With the COVID regulations, I don't know if I agree. And apologies if that's not the point you were making there. But if you were, wouldn't wanting to do everything you could not to spread a disease that initially is killing a lot of people, in particular those with compromised immune systems, be a good example of helping your fellow man by following, regulations? In that example, I was never worried about COVID for me, my wife, or my kids, not once. None of us are immunocompromised. Not in any way. We're all active. No pre-existing health problems of any kind, really. So when I was wearing a mask on a plane, which I fucking hated, by the way, fogged my glasses, made it hard to type. I didn't actually believe that the mask was doing much to help stop spread the virus, made me sweat more than I already do, and I'm prone to sweating so much as it is. Fucking sucked. I just hate having shit on my face. I don't like the way it feels. I'm weird that way. I won't button the top button on dress shirts because it feels like the fabric on my neck is scratching me or choking me. I don't like to wear a tie because I feel like I'm being choked. Don't like to be choked. Won't wear over-the-ear headphones in the gym because it makes me sweat so much and I don't like the way it feels on my face. I think you see my point. I fucking hate wearing masks. But I would do it again, not for me, not for the government, not to be a follower, but simply to at least make my fellow citizens who are worried, often for very valid reasons, feel safer. I didn't agree with all the policies of COVID, but I usually agreed with the sentiment I felt was behind those restrictions. I did and still do believe it was about people trying to do the right thing in a crazy situation that came out of nowhere and save as many lives as possible. And I'm in favor of making small sacrifices in order to help others. Last thing, I included your message partially because partially because, the quote you referenced does apply very much to this next critical message, which is kind of also going with, in some ways, the point you were making. So I'm just going to morph into the next message, share it now. Super sucker Aaron Gree, or Aaron Grew, Gruis, Grew, perhaps, Aaron? Sorry if I fucked it up. Solid Meat Sack is disappointed in me. And I imagine he's not alone. He wrote in with a subject line of McCarthyism. Dan, I'd like to start with two things. First, I'm not mad, just disappointed. Second, I'm not pretending like I won't tune in next week. That being said, your choice to upload an episode about McCarthy the day before a major election and followed up with an update explicitly not endorsing a candidate when one of them has emulated McCarthy so rigidly feels like cowardice. I mean, the dude literally even has mentioned enemies within in the same way that McCarthy and others have done. I don't presume to put politics in your mouth, but it is difficult to reconcile many of the ideas that you routinely adamantly defend on your podcast with this choice. Had you left the message at go vote, I would have not had a problem. However, you specifically addressed the issue that you felt you would alienate half your listenership if you endorsed a candidate, and that stood out to me. You have not shied away from endorsing pretty open and sometimes aggressive views on a wide variety of topics, including but not limited to summary execution of pedophiles, sometimes without any form of judicial process, limitations on who should be allowed to vote, who should be allowed to run for office, and even what musicians should be allowed to produce music for the masses. Some I agree with, some I don't. Others that are best described as outright ludicrous. You have even regularly attacked politicians for using their positions for financial gain. I understand your financial losses are different than theirs, but it seems like you sold out the same way they do. To follow up an episode where you consistently and ruthlessly attack Joseph McCarthy for his unabashed flaunting of lies without any evidence as proof, as you have done with many others in the past, and his willingness to subvert any sort of democratic process, another topic that you have very willingly admitted that you think is wrong, with admitting that you won't endorse a political candidate when one of those candidates has objectively done the same thing over the course of the last 8 years, was a letdown. I teach high school, and I go out of my way to encourage all my students to vote, regardless of their views, based on their research, understanding of the world, values, etc. I pride myself on not leaving my personal politics out of the classroom. But for you to drop an episode about a demagogue, after so frequently expressing disdain for them, and then explicitly ignoring the same issue in the current election was a bummer at best. Shit, man, you even have a character that you've created to protect all ideas of democracy, and then didn't address the fact that a candidate has openly questioned many of the hallmarks of that democracy you so hope to defend. Thanks for your time. I don't care what anyone says. I still think you're worth 4 to 5 stars. Still excited for next week's episode. Aaron Grew. Well, Aaron, first off, truly, thank you for your message. I'm sure others are feeling the same way. Also, it was not a coincidence for me to drop the McCarthyism episode right before the election. I do think there are parallels from the 1950s with today's politics. And I do think a lot of Trump's rhetoric has been very similar to McCarthy's, and it has worried me. It's also worried a lot of his biggest supporters. So why didn't I name him? Why didn't I endorse the other side? Well, because, for one, I truly am just not sold on either political party right now. And so it's tough to really take a big stand behind someone who I also don't believe in. But I found that it's more effective in recent years. This is the main reason I didn't name him. I found it's more effective in recent years, when it comes to trying to get people to hear what you have to say about a polarizing issue. And nothing seems more polarizing and emotionally charged than politics in America right now. Nothing's even close. To have strong opinion on historical figures, I think it's better, and movements from the past rather than attacking the present, because the present is so emotional. I think it's more effective to lay out historical concerns, examples, and trust that your audience is perfectly smart enough to see the parallels and draw their own conclusions, to give people something to think about without them feeling attacked. I have watched closely over the years as many fellow content creators have denounced politicians on both sides. They've made strong arguments. I've lurked in their comment sections. And when they have been heavy-handed, I have literally never once seen a single comment from someone who says something to the effect of, you know what? I disagreed with you before this, but you're right. I fucked up. I should think more like you do. I'm going to change my political orientation right now. Never. Never seen anything remotely like that. Also, fighting for or against individual politicians is just not the hill I want to die on. We all have our hills. This one's not mine. I just don't care about any one politician. None of them inspire me right now. None of them. None of the national. I do care a lot about what fellow citizens think about various issues. that can read political, the issues I care about. I'm curious as to why they feel the way they do about this issue or that issue. And I feel that a good use of whatever influence I might have is to mostly just be the best person I can be and talk about that, to try and learn from historical mistakes, to talk about issues, to defend individual issues, to attack certain issues, as opposed to attacking or defending individual politicians, because people's emotions get wrapped up in this or that person. And if you name them, they stop listening to you. But if you talk about an issue that person has a spin on, they'll listen to you talk about the issue, in my experience. The hill I'm willing to die on is one defending marginalized people, which I have done over and over when I have, say, attacked the Catholic Church for their abuses, when I have stood up for transgender rights, stood up for body autonomy for women and the rights of women in general, when I've stood up over and over for racial minority groups and the rights of the LGBTQIA plus community. And I've done all of that knowing that it would hurt me financially, and it for sure has. When I doubled down on defending the Pride movement last summer that we donated to, we lost roughly 20% of our patrons in a month and at least 20% of our overall audience. And I would do it again. That's my hill. That is how much this straight white man does care about people who are different than me. People that have been demonized for far too long. Even though I'm not demonized, fucking the easiest thing for me to do would be ignore all of it and just, appeal to the most people as possible and make the most money. But that actually doesn't sit well in my conscience. So while you still might be disappointed in me, and you have every right to be, I hope you now understand why I choose to fight the fights I do and why I choose to ignore others. And to be clear, anyone listening who voted for Trump, I don't think you're a bad person at all. I hate that simplistic view. I hate that simplistic, divisive rhetoric. And I hope you hate it too. And I hope you don't hate anybody who voted for Kamala or think less of them for doing so. Most people who vote are just trying to do what they feel is right to help their families. I do believe that. I don't believe that most people are voting to take away the rights of others. Maybe I'm naive, but I don't. I think they're voting the way they do because largely they're scared. They're scared of inflation. They're scared of illegal immigration. They're scared of things they don't understand. They're scared of things they think they should be scared of because of religious convictions, but scared all the same. And I want the same thing this next 4 years that I wanted before this election was decided. I want the economy to improve for all, but mostly for the most economically vulnerable members of our population. I want inflation to not continue to threaten tens of millions of Americans with impending concerns of homelessness. I want the medical industry to be regulated so that tens of millions of Americans can get needed treatment they currently can't afford. I want the real estate wealth gap to be addressed so some home ownership, isn't continually out of reach for tens of millions of Americans. I want politicians to stand up to Wall Street. I want women not to have to worry about dying in a hospital because a doctor won't induce a medically needed abortion to save their fucking life. I want women to not have to seek out back alley abortions because they've lost the right to govern their own body. I want LGBTQIA plus people to have all the same rights as my white, straight male ass. And I'm going to continue to share historical lessons that speak to these issues. I'm going to continue to voice my concerns, even if it is to the detriment of my audience size, which it probably will be. I'm going to continue to love my fellow meat sacks, whether they're a quote liberal or a quote conservative. I'm going to continue to hate labels like liberal and conservative, labels that just inherently divide us. And I'll probably continue to hate the divisive two-party system we have, since neither one of those motherfuckers represents my beliefs. So hail fucking Nimrod. That's where I stand. And now let's end on some love for one of our own who's going through it. A hurting yet grateful meat sack identifying themselves only as T sends in the message with the subject line of, "I'm truly not sure." Hello to everyone at Timesuck and Bad Magic Productions. My name is T. I'm writing today to say thank you for what you do. I struggle immensely every day to live life. I find there is little to no hope most days, and it is hard to go on often enough. Mentally, life is a struggle. Emotionally, life is a struggle. Even more so, financially, life is an absolute struggle. It is hard to find encouragement in life to continue looking forward. The depths of despair seem to creep closer each passing day. I can't seem to find any purpose in this life. I can't find any meaning, though I've tried so hard. Life is not at all what I hoped for growing up. It's a pit of sorrow, struggles, and frustration. I don't know what the answer is. I wish I could hit a reset button and try again. I hate life usually. I hate myself even more. I have an associate's degree, which doesn't mean shit nowadays. I can't find a job. I have no true friends. Can't find a place I belong. And each day I move closer to the engulfing forces of depression. I feel worthless. I feel like I've wasted my life. I feel like I'm going to be lost forever. But with all that being said, I wanted to say thank you, and thank you to the Bad Magic production team for creating something that can bring a smile to my face once or twice a week. Thanks for being inspirational, helping people like myself continue each day. Thank you for inspiring me to start my own podcast. Thank you for being a stand-up people, for helping so many of those around you in numerous ways. It's been an extraordinary boost to my mental well-being since I found the suck in April of this year. I'm not sure what I was going for with this email. I just wanted to say thank you very much for all you do. Best luck moving forward. Peace and blessings as always. A solid 3 out of 5 stars. Won't change a thing. You guys do. Your friend, T. Well, T, thank you for what you wrote. Yeah, heavy stuff. Thanks for being kind and sweet and empathetic and vulnerable. Vulnerable? Man, I really can't talk today. And I want you to take the love you just gave for us here and give it to yourself. Seriously. We all fuck up. We all make mistakes. None of us are perfect. The people who pretend to be the most perfect, I think, are probably struggling the most in some ways. We all wish we could do certain things over. None of us can move the clock backwards, have a mulligan. No one gets a redo. Until one of us figures out how to build a time machine, the path is only forward, ever forward. And all we can do is just manage that the best we can. I don't know the details of your struggle, but I do know we have a great group of people in the Cult of the Curious Facebook group, on the Timesuck Discord and other Timesuck adjacent Facebook groups who have been through a lot, who have bounced back from a lot. Get in there. Ask questions. How do you help yourself financially? Do you need to declare bankruptcy to wipe out, your debt? I'm sure we have a lot of members with strong financial acumen. Do you need to find some therapy on a sliding scale you can afford? Do you need to be directed to some free support groups so you can just talk to some people, either online or in person? Groups you can go to each week. Do you need to meditate a little each day? I don't know what the answer is, but I do know you won't find it unless you keep seeking and searching, and seek knowing that no one's problems are fixed in a single day. Look for little wins, not big ones. I struggle with that a lot myself. I've been learning it more as I get older, even though I've heard it from people since I was a teen. Don't go for it's not all or nothing. Look for the little wins. Be happy with the little wins. Chip away at the darkness. Rome wasn't built in a day, and your mental health won't be built in a day either, A new you can't be built quickly. I hope we can continue to be a bright spot for you, a refuge in the darkness. I don't know you, T, but I love you. I love your spirits. So don't give up. Fucking ever. Keep seeking. Just continually. Keep chipping away. Nimrod will not be pleased if you ever give up. And for me, I love you guys, and I think that's all I have for today.
Thanks, time suckers. I needed that.
We all did.
Well, thank you for listening to another Bad Magic Productions podcast. Scared to Death, Timesuck each week. Short Sucks, Nightmare Fuel on the Timesuck and Scared to Death podcast feed some weeks. Go build a boat this week. Go build it in your parents' basement. You don't live with your parents? Well, find your parents' house. Head to their basement. Tell them to stay out until you're done. Parents are dead? Well, break into your childhood home. Build a boat in that basement. Tell them that until you're done, they can chill the fuck out. And they can keep on sucking.
Bad Magic Productions.
Hey, remember me? I'm Lal Menendez, convicted murderer and businessman. I might be finally getting out of prison soon. Since I don't have my parents left to murder, I guess I'm going to be focusing 100% on my business. Would you like to do business with me? Do you like business? You like money? Rolex watches? Sports cars? Condos on the beach? Business? Let's have a business lunch. Talk about profits, interest, return on investments, wealth building. These are some business terms I've been learning about in prison. What about dividends? Are those good for business? What about cash, real estate, stock, options, black, gold, blood, diamonds, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, OnlyFans models? Is any of that good for your business? If any of this made business sense,
Call 1-800-BUSINESS. Business. Listen to my jingle. Don't forget who to call. Call 1-800-BUSINESS if you like business, business, business. 800 with a 1 in front. Business, business, printed money, profits. Business, kingpin, cocaine, Menendez, investment, enterprises, tennis lessons, business. I'm lonely, I still need a toupee, need money, business. Gonna need a job when I get out. 1-800-BUSINESS. I could be your neighbor, maybe your roommate, or your business lover. 1-800-BUSINESS. Give me business. Menendez business. Business. Business.